Rogue Knight by Illuviar. 131st Interlude, Various 2. Interlude. Intelligence Woes 1 equals RK equals Borealis Coruscant. When most people imagine clandestine meetings, they think about dingy bars, dark corners, or abandoned warehouses. Perhaps secure rooms deep in the bowels of an intelligence agency or a ship in space. That perception wasn't entirely wrong. When he was an active agent, Marek Isle had his share of escapades, bar crawls, and skulking through places where most civilians would fear to tread. Even with all the responsibilities and headaches attached to his new job, he really didn't miss the bad old days. Instead of being stuck in the back of a cutthroat-infested drinking hole and left wondering if the patrons would decide to start a fight and potentially blow up his op. Nowadays, Marek dined in the private rooms of Coruscant's best restaurants. Places like the Borealis offered discretion and an excellent menu. Not to mention that this was practically the SIB's backyard and as secure as it could get. Marek sat in a small, tastefully decorated room with a decor that radiated class. The place was shielded so clients could talk privately, away from pesky reporters and competitors, and was swept by Yile's people before he got in. Even better, as far as anyone was concerned, he was down in the main restaurant, dining with his wife, something he would rather do than leave to a body double. However, this conversation couldn't be postponed, and it wasn't one he could comfortably hold back in HQ. His guest got in and sat down across the table from him. Marek nodded at the Twi'lek woman. He knew that she was supposed to be meeting with the Senate's Appropriation Committee right now, and had a double of her own handling that. While such cloak and dagger games were usually reserved for horror movies, they did occasionally have their places. Marek, you called. I hope this is important, given the lengths we had to go to maintain plausible deniability for this meeting. Director Fell raised a hand and looked at her blue skin. This paint is a pain to get off. Her face was off too, thanks to detachable implants meant to fool face recognition software. Marek, on the other hand, had to simply exchange places with his double in the fresher. He did get the better of the deal tonight. I do. We need to discuss our resident Sith and the trouble the Jedi are causing. Yil frowned. Yesterday I was approached by Master PL to discuss the war effort. At least that was the official excuse. While we did discuss it, he was more interested in evaluating my opinion on Vale and how I would react if he continues to gain power. We do have contingencies in place. The Chancellor insisted we do so after Vale revealed himself as a Sith. Ivan pointed out. Piel was more afraid of our new friend gaining more power legally. He was also concerned that certain senators might be falling under the Sith's sway. Perhaps even the Chancellor if Vale's influence isn't contained, Marek explained. Ah. That was all his colleague offered. The conservative elements of the Jedi Order tried to remove him through the Senate and found less support than they expected. My sources tell me that Piel and Teen have been meeting with a lot of senators lately, and not only with Silverus's friends. I know your people have been working closely with Vale's special ops outfit. I need to know what he's planning, Marek continued. Officially, causing trouble for the Seps and recovering caches of tech and resources he stashed for a rainy day while he was with the Empire. I have it on good authority that we'll be seeing some tangible benefits soon. I'm sure he has been running some side projects too, the kind that would benefit him personally, but that's to be expected. You know better than me what he's been up to on Coruscant. Ivan offered. Thanks to his efforts, we've got control over a significant chunk of the local underworld and have been able to intercept some of the CIS channels that go through it. Feed them disinformation, the works, Marek said, showing one of his cards, though he was pretty sure his colleague at least suspected about that particular operation. I'm more interested about ship build-up, especially now that he has the Mandalorians at his beck and call. Vale will have a decent-sized modern navy under his control in about 2 years. It will take that long to build the hulls and train crews, unless the Seps object. The one item of particular interest I have is that Vale has been outfitting a handful of Venators with Imperial technology. My people haven't been able to get details, though it's slow going. There won't be more than a few upgraded units ready before the Seps come calling. Some kind of super weapon, Marek snorted. Those usually tended to be a major resource sink for no tangible gain, though now and then the Sith-spawned things actually worked. When Ivan frowned, Ile raised his hands in surrender. I know, so far Vale hasn't been known for flights of fancy. If he upgrades ships, whatever he's got is going to work. It's another question how effective it will be against modern tech. However, I doubt that a few ships will be a game-changer in the short term. Until Mandalore's navy is up and running, our Sith friend won't have the muscle to be a major military threat. Even then, unless the Confederacy wrecks us, that won't change overnight. Still, you do have concerns, Marek. You wouldn't have called me otherwise, Ivan stated. That's true. Just in case the Jedi aren't too paranoid, we'll need to update our contingency plans. The political situation changed since we made most of them. Vale is at least a reluctant ally with Amidala, Organa and Mothma's cliques, and by all accounts the Corellians are growing closer to him. They did practically give him one of their star cruisers as a flagship. Ivan nodded. Allocating the freedom to Vale's command was a powerful statement coming from Corellia. That ship alone could take on a fleet and win. At worst, moving against him without Durasteel-clad evidence that he works against the Republic might at the very least see the Corellians pulling back into an uneasy neutrality. Given its situation, Naboo doesn't have much choice for the time being and will be with us, no matter Amidala's personal feelings. But if her husband gets thrown to the Krathhounds by the tribunal, things might get messier on that front too, Marek summarized. That's not enough support to be a direct threat, but it's sufficient to cause us some major troubles. Ivan looked thoughtful. I'm actually not concerned that Vale will be pulling a military coup anytime soon. I've studied what we had in the archives on the man. Despite his initial misgivings, the Chancellor seems to support him nowadays. Marek spoke carefully. Don't tell me you buy in that nonsense. Ivan chuckled. That Vale influences Palpatine? Marek snorted. Not really. That the Chancellor might have decided to ally with his good friend Mandalore. Amidala's little friends aren't the only ones concerned that Palpatine has been gathering too much power in his hands. The man's support is very high, and now he is good friends with a successful and charismatic general. Marek frowned. No, it's not a Sith coup I'm afraid of. It's what Palpatine and Vale practically running the Republic would mean, I fear. Marek sighed. And I'm afraid what the Jedi and some senators might do to prevent such an outcome. Wyle laid down his cards. He has been studying Ivan Fell ever since she became the director of ONI. As far as he was able to figure out, the woman was utterly devoted to the Republic. Marek really hoped he hadn't misread her character. Palpatine is already one of the most powerful men in the galaxy, arguably the most powerful. Don't you think that becoming a dictator in all but name would be too much trouble for too little gain? Ivan asked after thinking for a long time over what Marek told her. The Chancellor is a very good politician. I know for a fact that the nice old man he presents himself as is at least partially an act. He didn't remain a Chancellor for more than a decade without getting his hands dirty. I honestly can't say if Palpatine would be tempted by more personal power. Marek chuckled. He might even go for it just to reduce the headaches the Senate have been giving us all lately. I'll grant you that, Ivan said. What are you going to do if your concerns are founded and they go for it legally? I'm sworn to protect the Republic democracy. Marek frowned. Since becoming the director, I've seen exactly how much of the latter there is in the Senate. If Vale tries a coup, that would be simple. We have plans for it. Ivan nodded. A lot of them, and they're good ones. However, if Palpatine and his new friend gain enough support to practically control the Senate, Fell sighed. I know it's unlikely with all the furor that Vale becoming Mandalore caused, but still, it's our job to plan for the unlikely. If the Jedi try acting outside the law, things should be simple too. Ivan interjected. Legally, yes. Politically, militarily. At this point, it's going to be anything but. Marek shrugged. The Jedi did a great job of destroying both their political and public support. They're getting desperate, aren't they? And desperate people make foolish decisions, often quite messy too. Marek simply nodded. What do you have in mind? Ivan asked. I'd prefer to have operatives ready to move at very short notice against any eventualities. Navy support and orbital deployment capabilities could get useful, Marek explained. ready to reinforce critical locations and disrupt any coup in progress if things get that far, or arrest conspirators before they could throw the Republic into chaos. There are at least 3 contingencies that more or less cover such an idea. I want people who don't figure in any of our contingency plans, just in case. I see. Something can be arranged. Do you have any new information about the Confederacy's strategic aims? Marek changed the topic. We know for sure they'll be seeking to connect the territories they control and will be striking at the hyperlanes connecting them, which are under our control. My operatives have heard rumors, as well as intercepted partial orders, indicating that the Seps will be trying to cut off everything beyond the inner rim from reinforcements and supply coming from the core worlds. Ivan said, not unexpected. Any indications, what are they going to do about our industrial advantages? Even if we keep just most of the core and inner rim, that still will keep us ahead. We both know about the massive build-up at Fondor, still no hard evidence if they will go for Quat or Corellia, and the Seps have to cripple one of those systems if they are to have a chance. RK equals. Interlude. This family thing isn't all it's cracked up to be. RK equals. Joel Solo's apartment, Corellia. Rah, Tra inquired. No way. Joel shook his head in denial. I didn't plan for this. The Corellian waved at his brand new uniform. I'm supposed to be a cargo hauler, Criffit. The large Wookiee, who was outfitted with a uniform of his own, consisting of a colorful sash going over his right shoulder, looked unconvinced. Tra snorted too. Uncle, did you plan this? A disgruntled-looking younger Solo entered the room. Han had a uniform of his own, a school one in his case. Joel turned his attention to his young nephew. This I can take credit for. He beamed at the kid, who looked anything but happy. I don't need to go to school. I'm sure you two can tech me loads of useful stuff, Han grumbled. You can learn loads of useful stuff at school too. Meet new friends, especially girls. Joel trailed off when his XO roared in amusement. Don't you start. Ew, why would I need to meet girls? They're icky. Han grimaced. We're not having this conversation now. Joel shook his head to Tra's mirth. If you're good, I'll even make sure to keep you away from Cousin Tyon and won't have her explain things to you. That threat made Han blanch. He had insisted on meeting the rest of the family. After pestering his uncle for a month, Joel caved in, much to the youth's displeasure. It turned out that most of the relatives left on Corellia were either mad like Aunt Tian or utter bastards, with Thraken Sal Solo acting as a poster child for the latter group. Most of the decent Solos left in the galaxy were either spread all over or died during the separatist attack on Coruscant when they found themselves at the wrong time in the wrong place. I'll be good, Han exclaimed. He was honest too. Well, mostly. Dulana chose that moment to enter the dining room, bringing a large tray covered with a rich breakfast. The old Wookiee had been acting as Han's mother ever since he met her after becoming a part of Shrike's crew, until he had his fortunate run-in with that Republic general at the spaceport and was later introduced to his uncle. Dulana had been the only one to ever give a criff for the younger Solo. Han still couldn't wrap his head around how she ended up working for his uncle. He had simply asked if there was something that could be done about it, informed Joel that Shrike might cause trouble, and the next thing Han knew was that Dulana had arrived ready to begin her next job, and he had been assured that Shrike wouldn't be a problem ever again. All his uncle said about it was that he cashed in on a favor, and that was that. Roro? Dulana asked. Han here isn't too keen on going to school. Joel pointed at him. Hey, rah! Tra laughed at the show. Traitor? Han pointed at Joel's old friend, then subdued when Dulana gave him a disappointed look. Solo the younger grumbled and got to his seat, then began to devour his breakfast. Finding his family was supposed to be all good. While it was pretty great, being forced to go to a useless school was anything but. Meeting the rest of the Solos currently on Corellia had been a major disappointment too, but at least Uncle Joel was pretty great when he didn't make him do useless stuff. School, who needed it when Han could be learning useful stuff instead? Rag? Dulana asked after getting to her own seat. I got a proposition I couldn't really refuse, a commission in Corsec Navy as a Commodore. The pay is good, The benefit's nothing to sneeze at, and as things stand, we'll have a chance to get some more payback, Joel explained. Huh. That explained the new uniform, Han thought. It also means that for the foreseeable future, we'll be in system. The older Solo nodded at his friend. Tra voiced his agreement around a large bone he was chewing on. Equals RK equals. Interlude. A Fallen Jedi's Plans. Republic Cruiser Vengeance Hyperspace. After losing Kira, Jared found keeping his boundless fury under control almost impossible. His very presence had caused deaths and loads of destroyed equipment before the Jedi Master was able to channel his emotions into something productive. Even now, weeks after the fact, all Perion dreamed of was vengeance. He wanted to march to Coruscant, face Vile and tear out the Sith's still-beating heart, then crush it with his own hands. He wanted to see the Sith-controlled abomination that was today's Republic burn in the flames of hell. But most of all, Jared wanted to be back home with his wife and all the friends he lost still alive. He knew that was a naive, impossible dream. All he had was vengeance and duty to the death, to see that there could be a future which wasn't profaning all they fought and died for. Figuring what to do, how to achieve his goals without succumbing further to the dark side, because Perion wasn't totally blinded by his fury, had been very hard. More than once, he had to go out in the mountains alone and unleash his anger on the surrounding area in a bit, to calm himself enough that he could think more or less clearly. In the end, it was Denny's arrival and General Garza having enough of his antics and sitting him down to talk that allowed Jared to get his head out of his backside and began acting as the experienced Jedi Master he was supposed to be. They discussed their options, those that were left now that their presence was exposed, and reached an unpleasant conclusion. In order to succeed, they had to find allies. Simply continuing to bid their time and replenish their forces was no longer viable. The Republic was out for obvious reasons. The same was true for the Hutts and the various small neutral policies and systems. However, there was a ray of hope, a spark of light in all the darkness choking the galaxy. The Confederacy's leadership had seen the truth. They had arrested the Sith controlling them and were determined to root out Dooku's master too. That's why Jared was en route to the Confederate capital to offer the remnant services in eradicating the Sith-controlled Republic. Perion was sure that before the end he would face Vale and have his vengeance. Equals RK equals. Interlude. 2 Jedi and a Sith. Hangar Bay Republic Cruiser. Unflinching location classified. General Ram Kota glared at the commando unit shadowing Mace Windu. Even if the former master had been in the wrong, having clones holding the man's leash was infuriating. Of course, given what Kota learned just a few days ago, he wasn't sure that Windu had been wrong in the first place. Quite the opposite, in fact. That's far enough, Commander, Kota frowned. My men will ensure that Windu will cause no trouble. Go to the mess hall and have something hot to eat. Sir, we're under orders to... The commander disagreed. That wasn't a suggestion, soldier. I gave you a direct order, and you will follow it. Kota's glare intensified. Clones. He found them lacking when the heard about them, and now that Ram knew the truth, he was beginning to loathe them, even if it really wasn't their fault. Sir, yes, sir, the commander saluted. Kota nodded, and 2 squads of his militia, all armed and armored to the teeth, went to escort the commandos. When they were finally out of sight, Mace sighed in relief. I appreciate this, old friend. The former master nodded. Being looked down at as a potential traitor by my troops, it grates. Walk with me, Mace. There is someone you need to meet. Ram turned around and headed out of the cramped hangar of the Venator. I was the one sent to pick up Dooku when the Confeds decided to give him up as a gesture of a goodwill. I naturally expected a trap, but orders are orders and any chance to get him back in our custody. Kota trailed off. 5 days ago, we arrived to find 2 separatist fleets tearing each other apart. Then a third arrived and joined the one being attacked. They contacted us in the middle of the battle and very politely apologized about the delay in handing us the prisoner. Infighting. Possible civil war, Windu wondered aloud. Ram felt a surge of hope in Mace. No such luck, just a bunch of Dooku sympathizer trying to rescue him. They obviously walked into a trap and were wiped out. For a change, the Separatists held up their word and actually delivered Dooku. He's in a pretty bad shape, but alive. You've kept this under wraps. Windu sounded surprised. I've heard nothing about it, nor have any of my contacts. I did, Kota admitted. I talked with the man. After what happened to him, and after I filled him in on the latest developments, he talked. As far as I can tell, Dooku told me the truth as he knew it. Not good, Windu inquired. I'll let you decide for yourself. I'd appreciate if you watch him carefully for any deception. What Dooku admitted, Ram sighed. It changes everything. You were right, Mace. About what? Vale, the Sith. We're in more trouble than we ever suspected. Equals RK equals. Master Windu, good to see you again. I would offer to shake your hand, but as you can see, Dooku shrugged. The Count was sitting on his cot and looked regal even in plain white prisoner garb. Mace examined the man he once considered friend. Dooku had no arms. Did you run in another pirate? Windu asked. Number just my former friends, deciding that I might be too hard to contain if they let me keep my remaining hand. Given his predicament, Dooku sounded far too amused. The man was in such good spirits that it made Windu on edge. You've been telling some interesting things to Master Kota here. Will you share them? Mace asked. I had a lot of time to think lately, to wonder about how things went so wrong so fast. Dooku's face became severe, yet the Count's presence in the Force was almost serene. While Windu could sense the stench of the dark side on Dooku, the aristocrat was actually at peace right now. After talking with Kota here about what happened after my imprisonment, I was confused at first. However, when I thought about it, things fell into place. My master used and discarded me. It's obvious. The plans he shared with me, our grand design, all was deception. Do you know what Sidious taught me? That there could be only two real Sith at a time, a master and an apprentice. I believed myself to be the second, the apprentice. I was wrong. Please continue. Windu stared intently at the captive. Everything Dooku was saying was the truth. The man believed every word he was uttering and wasn't even trying to access the Force or use other deception. Things went exactly as Sidious and I planned, until Vale appeared from thin air. He was an enigma at the time, a man without past, yet he was revealing more and more abilities that indicated his connection with the dark side. He even claimed to be a Sith. Dooku chuckled darkly. Do you know the truth, Master Windu? I have only conjectures, deductions, though they make sense. What I know is that the Sith have always been around. They've been planning and plotting for centuries until everything culminated in this war. When I created the Confederacy and told everyone that the Sith were controlling the Republic, I told the truth, a truth I shared with Kota here. Dooku's amusement grew. Do it then. I'm curious what you're going to claim. Windu spoke calmly while feeling anything but. The implications of what Dooku was saying were severe. A bit of history first. I believe Kenobi uncovered the records. It was him, wasn't it? Dooku asked. What records? Mace inquired. About the creating of your valued clone army. Kota here has the right idea, you know. It was us Sith who ensured that the Republic will have an army to fight this war. It was us who allowed you all to last more than a few months before being overrun. Why? Windu asked while his mind was busy struggling with the revelation. The Council knew that there was something wrong with the creating of the clone army. Sidious had died shortly after he commissioned the army. That was too convenient. Yet the Kaminoans actually had records of the Jedi meeting them, his signature and biometrics on the contracts. The Council investigated and reached a dead end. Was Diaz compromised? Had he aligned himself with the Sith or simply been deceived? No one had a good answer. Because the war was deemed a useful tool, a distraction and a way to concentrate more power in the Chancellor's hands. Dooku explained. The Sith intend to control the Chancellor and through him, the Republic. The revelation was horrifying. Dooku laughed and Kota shook his head. I thought that too. We aren't so fortunate, the Jedi said. My master, Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith, has been controlling the Republic directly for more than a decade. You've met him many times, Master Windu. You know him as Sheev Palpatine. Dooku's chuckled mirthlessly. Impossible. We would have noticed something. Mace shook his head in denial. I thought so too before he demonstrated his mastery over the dark side. Dooku shrugged. He betrayed us all, used us against each other. For power, for vengeance. The Confederacy was supposed to be dealt with, and the Republic victorious. I was meant to have a change of heart at the end, after the Jedi were dealt with and the Republic transformed into the First Galactic Empire. Dooku must. Instead, here we are. The war has escalated. I believed things had gone wrong, and Sidious simply lost control. But now I wonder. Dooku trailed off. Will you pay attention? I'm tired of repeating my story. He wanted to hear it 6 times already. The Count nodded at Kota. Windu shook his head and tried to concentrate. If this was true, if the Republic was already under Sith control. Vale, Mace whispered. Another Sith. I no longer have any doubts about it. He is Sidious's real apprentice. I was simply a means to an end. I never expected that the Sith would come into the open. It was never a part of the plan. Dooku had a faraway look on his face. You know that whatever I tell you, it will not be enough. Vale made sure of that. Even if Palpatine is revealed as a Sith, he can find a way out of it thanks to his apprentice. Most of the Republic won't care, and me claiming that Palpatine is behind the war would simply not be credible. At best, it would be considered a Confederate ploy to destabilize the Republic at the worst time. He's quite right, unfortunately. Kota grumbled. I've had days to think about it. We have no proof but Dooku's word. If we go public, it will be enough to throw the Republic into chaos. Perhaps enough to ensure that the Confederacy wins while we're all too busy dealing with the fallout. Not necessary enough to see the Chancellor removed legally. Palpatine has been controlling the Republic for years. He has broad public support and directly and indirectly controls at least half the Senate even after new crop of senator arrived. Do you really think that you can remove him legally at this point? Dooku's chuckle grew sinister. We tried to remove Vale legally and had more than the words of a traitor and a mass murderer to use against him. Windu spoke quietly. He was busy concentrating on his unique talent with the Force and seeking the best possible path to the future. Outing Palpatine might create big enough chaos to see him removed as Chancellor. That's probably the best we can hope for legally. Doing so would leave him freer to be Sith. Windu grimaced. Doing so now would all but guarantee a separatist victory. The former Jedi Master closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Whatever we do, we'll have one chance. You're talking about a coup? Kota frowned. It's not going to work without significant support among the army. Not necessary. We might need just enough to secure most of Coruscant while dealing with the Sith, Windu countered. The aftermath of the Confederacy attack might be our best choice. 132nd Chapter, 33, Parts 1 and 2. Phase 33, Fallout, Part 1, =RK=, Chancellor's Office, Senate Building, Coruscant. Palpatine sat stiffly behind his desk. He had plastered a grave expression on his face, and for once it was genuine. It was 4 hours since he gave the orders to burn Atria. That by itself was of no consequence besides the political complications. Some of those were already at hand. Organa had sniffed that something was wrong and more or less invited himself after Kenobi arrived. There were already rumors about Atria, and the media was making things even more complicated. There were dozens of experts on the networks discussing what the local reporters were sending before Vale's fleet jammed communications. The loss of contact was a dead giveaway that something had gone even more wrong, and Palpatine had to fend off a lot of questions from concerned senators. That was one of the main reasons why the Chancellor didn't kick Organa out of his office. Palpatine would need all the help and allies he could get in order to mitigate the fallout. However, the political complications were becoming a secondary concern. The last call from the fleet was that they were moving to neutralize the Atrasian navy and dispose of Crimson. Now, 4 hours later, that whole system was silent like a graveyard. No one was answering the hails. For all Palpatine knew, Vale had managed to get himself killed, and that criffed-up plague was free. The massive disturbance in the Force he felt a few hours ago didn't help matters. The only reason Sidious wasn't exposed then was because Yoda had been severely affected by the backslash too. The Chancellor somehow managed to keep a strained smile on his face, while his other guests were busy checking on the Jedi. It had been a very close call. Even now, Sidious could still feel Furious' scream echoing through the Force. It was drowning everything, and even if he dared try with Yoda around, the Sith was doubtful he would have been able to divine anything useful. Palpatine's only consolation was being able to watch the Jedi Master's mortification and Organa's sick fascination when Zash explained to the senator who she was, where she came from, and exactly what she knew about Crimson, and why sterilizing Atria was the only sane course of action. Unfortunately, it didn't take the Alderaanian too long to become indignant and declare that any of this wouldn't have been needed if Palpatine had only warned everyone about the plague. The Chancellor had to suppress a snort at that suggestion. Really, Senator? Do you honestly believe that any of the system defense navies would burn a significant chunk of a continent, perhaps their whole world on our say-so? While I'm convinced that Crimson is as grave threat as our fragmentary records and Vale's and Zash's first-hand accounts suggest, I'm not ready to risk the whole galaxy on the belief that everyone would believe us. Sidious countered. At least a warning would have allowed for a partial evacuation, Organa exclaimed. It would also give Crimson a window of opportunity to leave an infected planet and spread further. Zash countered in a bored tone. That critter is one of the worst things the Empire managed to create. Killing a world to contain it, that's a reason for celebration. The alternative is that all of us end up eaten. This was going nowhere. For more than an hour they have been speaking in circles. Organa simply refused to believe that Crimson was terrible enough to condemn a whole world without trying to save as much of the population as possible. Palpatine was sure that a lot of senators and citizens would agree, just to make his life more difficult. He contemplated creating his empire earlier to cut down the need to explain himself to idealistic fools. The Chancellor's comm beeped, and Palpatine hurried to activate it. The image of an unknown middle-aged man in Corellian uniform appeared. The human looked like he had gone a few rounds as a stress relief to a furious Sith. "Sir, I'm Commander Rostek Horn, and I'm the acting commander of the containment fleet." "I see. Report." Palpatine spoke curtly. The Sith didn't like the implications, even if they might mean that Vale was no longer around to complicate things. Atria has been sterilized. Their navy is neutralized, either disabled or destroyed. As far as we can determine, no ship made it past our blockade. Unfortunately, we have no way of knowing how many left before our arrival. Crimson might still be in play. Sir, it's my recommendation that any ship that might have come from Atria be placed under quarantine or destroyed it. The crew doesn't comply. The commander paused for breath. I don't know how that thing did it, but it struck at the whole fleet as we were commencing the bombardment. Most of our ships aren't combat effective due to severe casualties among the command and engineering crews, as well as various failures in multiple systems, some both. We've lost 2 cruisers with all hands, and I'm still waiting for a complete casualty list. I have to report the loss of the cruisers, Indomitable and Fearless. Further, before we reached the planet, the Atrisians activated their planetary shields and forced the General to deploy forces to the surface. 361st Armored Brigade and 98th Assault Division, led by Jedi Master Halcyon, engaged the Atrisian forces defending the generators. They succeeded in disabling them, however all perished in the bombardment. This are grave news. What is the status of General Vale and Admiral Holt? Palpatine asked. Unconscious, with possible brain damage, along with most of the command staff. At least they didn't appear insane like a lot of the others. Horn answered. What in the name of the Force happened there? Kenobi exclaimed. I believe we all severely underestimated what that thing can do, sir. I watched it pull Fearless out of orbit to crash on the surface. The commander shuddered. What help do you need? Kenobi asked. As many medical and repair ships you can spare, sir. The news at least made Organa shut up. The Chancellor sat frozen in his seat while his mind raced. Mere hours after reaching Atria, Crimson had gotten at least as strong as he was, perhaps more. Sidious knew that if he went all out, he might be able to pull a ship out of orbit and crush the minds of the crew of a whole fleet. It was another question if he would be able to do anything with the Force for weeks after that. Crimson, being a hive mind, probably didn't have such limitations as long as it had biomass to turn into nerve clusters to use. At least that's what Zash said. While Palpatine had been tempted by the opportunities such capability presented, he was glad he decided not to send people to retrieve a sample of the plague, just to watch Vale and determine if Crimson was truly as bad as portrayed. Now the Chancellor had his answer. Commander Horn, I'll personally make sure that all available support is dispatched to your location with all due haste, Palpatine declared. I'll also ensure the no-ship form Atria will have the chance to infect another world. The Chancellor looked at Kenobi. Make it so, General. Senator Organa, I'll be giving a press conference as soon as we have a more comprehensive report and then addressing the Senate. With Crimson possibly still a threat, we need to act swiftly. I'd appreciate your support in convincing the Republic at large of the danger we might still be facing. =RK equals. Part 2, GNN Studio, Coruscant. We're live in 10. Victoria Halcyon straightened up and summoned her best smile. She was pretty sure it looked quite fake despite her efforts. Watching the Chancellor's press conference less than an hour ago rattled her. Even with the war going on for more than a year now, the instances where whole planets were rendered uninhabitable were very rare. And all of those happened in the Outer Rim. Atria was different. A developed world right here in the core. Even worse, it wasn't enemy action that murdered a whole planet. It was the Gar under the direct orders of the Chancellor. She knew that right now Palpatine was busy explaining himself to the Senate. Her job was going to be to try explaining what the death of Atria meant to the average citizen. Victoria was unfortunate enough to catch a glimpse of footage released by the Navy. What little she saw while preparing made her sick. It also infuriated her because the very existence of such a threat had been concealed. To prevent panic, the journalist found it hard to believe. Halcyon slowly breathed in, then exhaled. Good evening, Coruscant. I'm Victoria Halcyon with a special edition of The Galaxy at War. A whole world just died, yet she had to pretend that it was just business like usual. And I'm Brosk Tonfa. Today we'll be discussing the tragedy that struck Atria and what it means for the galaxy at large. At 11 SGT last night, a frigate carrying deadly plague was shot down while making a run to Atria. Unfortunately, the local authorities were unaware of the nature of the danger at that time. Victoria began summarizing. When she was done, a holographic window appeared between her and Brosk. It began playing choice pieces of the Chancellor's interview. Victoria knew that Palpatine's words scrolled down the screens of trillions for a bigger impact. She could imagine it. Extremely dangerous, sapient, force-sensitive plague. More virulent than the Blue Shadow. Potential threat of extinction. Will take any necessary measures to protect the Republic from another Atria. The whole thing sickened Victoria, even if she knew where the Chancellor was coming from. Earlier today, GNN received exclusive recordings from the containment fleet sent to stop the plague dubbed Crimson 71. I need to warn you, what you're going to see is disturbing. Brosk looked severe. More windows appeared. Victoria glanced at the most convenient one and soon blanched. A Bithman in captain's uniform stood on the bridge of a Republic ship. Captions dubbed him Gel Nuna of the Fearless. The captain was speaking quietly in an almost detached manner, however those familiar with his species would be able to hear a lot of unease in his voice. The planetary shield is going down, Captain, the sensor operator said. Good, it's our turn now. Commence bombardment. Concentrate on Mainuan City until it's gone. The roar of alarms interrupted Nuna. The ship shook and he was thrown to his knees. Status report. What hit us? The captain shouted. Nothing we can detect. Sir, we're being pulled towards the planet. Someone off-screen exclaimed. Engines to full military power. Redline the reactors if you have to. If we go down, we're all dead. Nuna snapped. The ship shook harder this time. Victoria could hear the sound of screaming metal, and anyone not strapped in was thrown around the bridge like ragdolls. Nuna slammed headfirst in a console and fell. The captain's neck was twisted in an unnatural angle, and he didn't move again. There was more screaming, frantic orders from the XO, a scarred clone. They were followed by frantic shouts when the ship couldn't be stabilized. There were more grating sounds of tortured metal, then a call to abandon ship. Someone shouted that escape pods were being pulled towards Atria, and then the recording ended in static to be replaced by a sensor feed from another ship. In the last year, Victoria had seen enough sensor images to recognize what was happening. The Fearless was spinning out of control and heading straight towards the planet. The picture changed again. It was the Bridge of the Magnificent. All the visible crew were clones this time. The captain was on his knees and in such a position that the camera caught his face. He was bleeding from the nose, eyes, and ears. Most of the visible crew were in similar state, with the exception of 3 people. One was busy working at a console and was paying no real attention to the wounded around him. Another was clawing at his face, and it was obvious he had been able to tear out one of his eyes. A third clone was struggling with the madman in a valiant attempt to prevent him from injuring himself further. The feed changed to the engineering of the same ship. A few people were laying in pools of their own blood, while others were busy tearing each other apart. A clone was kneeling over another one who was catatonic with blood leaking from his eyes and was busy gnawing on the man's shoulder. There were shouts to stop the madness, blue stun bolts, and then a group of armored clones stormed the compartment. Another ship, the Pillar of Victory, was next. Everyone on the bridge was busy fighting each other, while in engineering a handful of sane people were trying to restrain the rest. Next was a long corridor. It was full of corpses, some partially eaten and all covered in gore. A squad of clones appeared and opened fire on a handful of crazy-looking men wielding wrenches, and was that a torn-off arm? Victoria averted her eyes. Suddenly she was glad she couldn't see the rest of the recordings. What she witnessed earlier wasn't nearly this bad. We still have no solid information on how many servicemen fell to the plague. The preliminary reports released stated at least 10,000 officers were casualties, but didn't go into details how many were dead, injured, or driven insane. Further, 22,000 clones led by Jedi Master Naja Halcyon from Corellia perished while successfully disabling Atrizia's planetary shield. The civilian casualties are estimated as total. According to the last census, 32 billion people lived on Atrizia. Borsk's voice was hollow. While much more people died on Christophsis, that planet wasn't destroyed and in time could recover. More importantly, it wasn't a core world, but in the outer rim close to Hutt space. What happened to Atrizia simply hit closer to home. The news has been out for a handful of hours, and there are already protests here on Coruscant. Victoria forced herself to keep her fake smile on and continue to speak calmly. Many people want to know why the Republic at large wasn't warned about Crimson. Why more ships haven't been dispatched to the region. Why was there no attempt to evacuate any of the population before placing them under quarantine to see if they've been exposed to the plague or not? Something snapped within Victoria and she went off script. Brosk glanced at her but remained silent and just kept his professional expression on. The producer for some reason didn't stop her either. That heartened Victoria and she carried on with her improvisation. Besides, it was too late to stop now. Just as importantly, how long did the government and GAR know about Crimson? Where did it came from? It's painfully obvious that elements within the armed forces were aware of its existence and ready to respond. A containment fleet led by General Vale arrived at Atrizia mere hours after the initial outbreak. How did he know to go there? What else hasn't the Chancellor revealed? I'm sure that those are questions we are all asking ourselves, and I hope that the Chancellor gives a satisfactory answer to the Senate. =RK=. Victoria expected at least some fallout from her actions. A reprimand from her producer, perhaps being quietly removed from her lucrative position as an anchor of the galaxy at war and an on-and-off news anchor. What the journalist didn't expect was a major story literally falling in her lap as a kind of reward. Victoria, we'll be talking about this later. Her producer gave her an exasperated look. You get yourself freshened up. We got a guest who enjoyed your antics and demanded that you interview her. She knows more about Crimson. He nodded towards a dark corner in the back. Victoria looked that way and frowned. There was nothing there. A woman with shoulder-length graying red hair stepped forward and practically materialized from the shadows. Those are some good questions, Miss Halcyon. I'm sure the Chancellor will be called to answer them. The woman smiled pleasantly. I'm Dr. Zash and I'm familiar with Crimson. Victoria perked at that admission. Did you work on that thing? She couldn't help herself and exclaimed, "Oh no, I have nothing to do with that debacle besides helping clean up the mess. My story is even weirder." The older woman smiled mysteriously. That's how Victoria found herself back in the studio conducting a live interview. "Good afternoon, Coruscant. I'm Victoria Halcyon. With me is Dr. Zash, who can shed some light on Crimson 71. It's a pleasure to be here, Victoria. It's a new experience." The doctor smiled widely. "Please tell us something about yourself, Doctor." Victoria smiled back. "My story is no less strange than that of General Vale." There was a lot of amusement in Zash's voice. Seeing him be a part of the Republic Armed Forces is certainly a big and unexpected surprise. "How so? I take it the two of you have history together?" Victoria leaned forward. This was going to be good. She could practically feel the scoop. "Of course we do," Zash laughed in delight. "A long time ago we worked together for the Sith Empire." That wasn't something Victoria expected. She blinked in confusion before her mind could reboot. "That's certainly a bold claim, Doctor. One that can be confirmed by both General Vale and the Chancellor's office. It was not too long ago when Delcatar stumbled on one of my research labs where I managed to get myself into stasis and slept away a few millennia. After he saved me, we talked about the old days. I knew of a few sites where the Empire was committing questionable research, and as it turned out, no one was sure if during the Empire's fall those were properly cleaned up. He decided to check just in case someone has stumbled upon one of them. Vale brought my concerns to the Chancellor, and it became evident that the Republic has been making inquiries in my old friend's past in order to confirm his origin. Unfortunately, one of the units sent to search through the Empire's ruins stumbled onto a facility where the Biowarfare Division used to work. When we tried to warn them, they didn't answer. The Chancellor asked me and Vale what was the worst thing they could have unleashed, and we both told him about Crimson. Zash sighed sadly. "So the Chancellor, or whoever sent the unit there, is responsible for Atria?" Victoria asked. "Oh, don't be silly, dear. It's the Empire's Biowarfare Division's fault. They created that horror and then lost containment. We had to burn a whole world, and more than 2 trillion sapients in order to contain it. The casualties were horrific. The damn thing had a few weeks to entrench itself and grow before sufficient forces could be gathered to eradicate it. Crimson was supposedly destroyed, but neither I nor Vale could take the chance and told the Chancellor about it as a worst-case scenario. It wasn't until news from Atria began coming in and we recognized Crimson that we knew it existed. By then it was too late." Zash sighed. There were tears in her eyes. "Can you honestly tell me that the Atrisian Navy would have burned at least an entire continent on our say-so? Because only that had a chance of stopping Crimson in the first few hours after it reached the planet. By the time the containment fleet arrived doing anything but sterilizing, that world would have been madness. Even then, most of the fleet was wrecked. Imagine what Crimson could have done with another 10-12 hours to grow. What could have happened if it landed on Coruscant and wasn't immediately dealt with?" Zash trailed off and Victoria blanched. By the time the interview ended, Victoria felt a lot of sympathy towards what General Vale and the Chancellor were forced to do. She was sure most of GNN's viewers felt the same way. Halcyon learned some interesting tidbits about the General's past, about the, by now, almost mythical Sith Empire and the Sith running it. Incidentally, that interview broke all records, and by the end of the day it was seen by most of the galaxy. Victoria's earlier mishap was forgiven and forgotten, and she was looking forward to interviewing Dr. Zash again. 133rd. Chapter 33, Parts 3 and 4. Phase 33, Fallout. Equals RK equals. Part 3, Senate Chamber, Senate Building, Coruscant. Palpatine was making one of his best performances in his decades-long political career. He knew that the consequences of condemning Atria were going to be severe. However, the circus he was the center of was getting ridiculous. Most of the senators who saw things his way, those he had bought or blackmailed to support him, stood strong. The Corellians and their allies were supportive, and for once Organa was proving useful instead of another headache. The same couldn't be said for too many of the remaining senators. There was a significant block of new faces Palpatine was unable to influence directly yet, and most of them were horrified by the GAR burning down a core world. Others, led by Sylvaris and her clique, seized the opportunity to attack Hims and Vale. This time the Cathar woman was supported by incested Mothma, who radiated fury. The only bright spot was the cracks forming in the alliance between Naboo, Chandrila, Alderaan, and their little cliques. Palpatine was pretty sure that Mothma was feeling betrayed after both Organa and Amidala appeared to be at least neutral, if not in open support of the Chancellor's decision. Then there were all other opportunists miking the mess for all it was worth. Palpatine was sure that some of them would be approaching him to cut deals in exchange of publicly supporting his decisions about Crimson. After suffering yet another string of accusations from Sylvaris, the Chancellor was beginning to lose his patience. It's been 5 hours that he had to fend off half the Senate, and he felt like frying someone to relieve some stress. That Cathar nuisance would do nicely. I could have acted differently, that much is true. Palpatine spoke coldly. For once he was unable to keep his kind old man mask firmly in place, and some of the Durasteel bellow showed in his voice. I could have told the Senate that Crimson might still exist. We could have debated for weeks, created committees to study the possible danger, called experts to advise us on the best course of action. The Chancellor glared at Sylvaris. Honestly, I disregarded that idea immediately. While this Senate is bastion of democracy, of freedom, it's anything but fast in its decision-making. I experienced that firsthand during the Naboo crisis before you voted me in to hold this prestigious position. What was it? Not enough evidence. A committee needed to be created to examine the situation. Palpatine sneered. The Sith Lord paused and took a deep breath. All his frustration and anger were bleeding through his mask, and that was unacceptable. Alienating a large portion of the Senate would make his life much more difficult. I'm nearing the end of my second term as Chancellor. Palpatine continued to speak more calmly. He chose not to acknowledge the shouts of support and derision coming from the senators. I've experienced the Senate at both its best and worst. Our efficiency leaves a lot to be desired when we deal with a comparatively small crisis. Frankly, when we have a hard decision with far-reaching consequences to make, we can, and more often than not, are bogged down for months or years. The noise level increased. Palpatine put a serene smile on his face and continued as if nothing was happening. What happened on Atria was a situation without precedent. There was no time to properly discuss matters. No enemy to negotiate with. Crimson was no conventional foe that could be halted or routed. Any attempted evacuation would risk spreading the sickness to other worlds. If handled carefully, if we were in ordinary lucky, we could have saved some small fraction of the Atrisians. However, that was a risk I couldn't justify. I still can't. Attempting such a humanitarian act would have risked the whole galaxy. After just 12 hours, Crimson was powerful enough to cripple a whole fleet. After a day, we couldn't have contained it. Palpatine sighed sadly. His face became a picture of pained regret. As a Chancellor, my duty is to protect the whole Republic, to always place the needs of the many in front of the needs of the few. I regret this terrible loss of life. Atria will be a part of my nightmares until my dying day. It was true even. Sidious shuddered to think how a damned sickness came so close to undoing all his work and ambitions. There was no other acceptable choice. The only way to be sure that Crimson was eradicated was to purge Atria from orbit. I will never have good night's sleep again after consigning 32 billions of my own people to death. Palpatine looked at the senators through haunted eyes. The memory of Atria is my burden to carry. Finally, Palpatine could hold back no longer and showed a trace of the fury he felt at everything that happened lately. What Senator Sylvaris chooses to forget is that if I hadn't made that call when I was asked to do my duty as a Chancellor, by now trillions all over the core could be dying, and the rest of the galaxy would have followed. Palpatine lowered his head and took a deep breath. He utilized various meditation techniques to restore his control over his temper. What he just said was going to help in some circles. However, he was sure it had alienated some senators from supporting him anytime soon. The Chancellor raised his head and showed himself as an old man, haunted by his regrettable actions, yet still ready to discharge his duty. Mothma was going to be his next Inquisitor. Her pod came to rest next to his own, and her blazing eyes bored into his own. That was a good speech, Chancellor. Still, you didn't answer some important questions. Why was there no warning of a ship carrying deadly bioweapon? I'm sure that any planetary defense force would have taken it seriously after Naboo. There was no warning sent to the public at large that a GAR unit you sent to a bioweapon warfare facility was out of contact, and you suspected they were coming back infected. You might have had no choice after Atria was exposed to that horror. I'm sure we'll be debating that for a long time. Answer my questions, Chancellor. Palpatine gazed back at the woman and ruthlessly crushed his flaring rage. Becoming Emperor would be worth it, just so he wouldn't deal with the criffing Senate and people like Mothma as often. There was a warning sent to all GAR units as well as the governments in the sectors, which if it existed, Crimson could reach. I should remind you, Senator, that until an expert saw footage from Atria, no one knew if the bloody thing still existed. We all hoped that the unit sent to that facility had fallen prey to either pirates, separatists, or a more conventional bioweapon. I was not going to cause a widespread panic out of fear when there could have been no threat. Frankly, gathering the containment fleet and putting General Vale in charge was more than I could possibly justify when we should have been preparing for the separatist offensive. Unfortunately, our fears weren't unfounded, and by the time we knew the truth, it was too late. Crimson had a free rein for long enough, and Atria was doomed before General Vale could arrive and give us a confirmation that the plague was not only there, but out of control. Somehow, Mothma's glare intensified. With that look on her face and such fury emanating from her, the senator did a passable rendition of a Sith. Mothma opened her mouth and began questioning him anew. Palpatine sighed and prepared to face the next round of the Inquisition. RK equals Master Teen's quarters, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. 4 Jedi Masters stood around a small table and watched an interview by a woman they believed to be a Sith Lord of old. All of them had researched Vale's past, knew of his 2 masters, Barras and Zash, knew that the woman had achieved functional immortality a few centuries before the Great War. We should have expected something like this, PL groaned. A master and an apprentice. Tien seethed. We've been deceived. All we knew of the Sith is suspect. All the actions we saw them do, smoke and mirrors. Master Yoda is convinced that Vale has been here for less than a year, Yaddle countered. Even if that's true, what about his master? Rancisis hissed. We've been played at least as far as Naboo and the Sith Kenobi defeated. Yes, Tien muttered, then frowned. We believed him. However, did he really win against a Sith who murdered his master? What are you saying, that Master Kenobi has been compromised that far back? PL exclaimed. I don't know, just a paranoid thought. Tien shrugged. It would explain much. He laughed bitterly. It would also mean we all had been blind for at least that long. I would like to say such a thing is out of the question, yet… Another shrug. Perhaps, however, does it matter? Kenobi is lost to us. This Zash woman might very well be the Sith we've been looking for all along. PL interjected. I've hoped that you've been overreacting all along. Yaddle stared at Zash's image. It would appear that I was mistaken. The Sith have obviously changed, evolved. They still decline to meet us in open combat and are content in distracting us with pawns like Dooku while undermining us. By deciding to reveal herself, this new Sith is showing that we're no longer a major threat. They have to be almost ready to move against us, Rancisis stated. That's what I'm afraid of. We've run out of time. At best, we have until the Separatists' offensive is contained. I doubt that the Sith will wait longer than that. Perhaps they would use the chaos and distraction to strike while we least expect it. Tien must. We need to act soon, or all is lost. PL nodded in agreement. Kota should had Dooku by now. Hopefully he could shed some light on the Sith's plans. Once we have him for sure, I'll talk with the intelligence directors. I feel that at least one of them will be willing to support us if we can offer some evidence. Tien explained. Even then we'll need military support, Rancisis noted. The presence of so many clones in the temple hasn't slipped my mind. Tien nodded. They keep us as hostages. Senator Silvaris might be inclined to support us. After Atria, there would be others who are horrified by the casual destruction of a whole world. We can use that, Piel thought aloud. This is madness. Yaddle groaned. It's unfortunate that I don't see a better alternative. Waiting isn't an option. You're with us then? Tien asked. I won't stand by and watch the Sith take over the galaxy without opposition, no matter the price we would have to pay. However, we need to plan carefully. Move all the younglings and the Jedi not proficient in combat away from Coruscant. Doing so will give us away, Ramesses muttered sadly. Not doing it will doom the Jedi even if we succeed, Yaddle countered. We'll make plans to evacuate them. At worst, the distraction of our actions should allow them to slip away. Piel agreed. RK equals. Republic cruiser unflinching, en route to Coruscant. Atria changed things, Zash's interview even more. Windu was aware of whom she was supposed to be. While it was possible that the woman was really just a scientist who got lucky or unlucky, depending on your point of view, the former Jedi Master didn't believe in such an explanation. The Sith had finally revealed their hand, and the implications were obvious. Time was running out fast, and there was no longer turning back. Windu looked down at the bodies of his minders. He and Kota had offered the commandos a chance to surrender. The clones tried to send a warning, but unfortunately for them, the whole ship was under heavy jamming. The commandos tried to fight, but they stood no chance against the pair of Jedi. Windu looked sadly at the corpses. So that's how treason feels like. He expected something more. I'll make sure everyone knows you're all out of contact doing an errand for me. My boys and girls will corroborate our story, Kota said. It might buy us some time. Windu frowned. They were too long out of contact already. Mace nodded at the corpses. It's a race against time then. We'll be at Coruscant in 10 days. I just hope it won't be too late by then, Windu muttered. I need to meditate, to find the path giving us the best possible odds. May the Force be with us all, Kota muttered. RK equals. Part 4, Medbay, Corellian Cruiser Freedom. Atria. Hi, I tried. Ah, you're still alive. Bo frowned. My dear husband. My wife's words contained enough sarcasm to choke at least half of Coruscant. You left me behind while you went to confront the greatest threat this galaxy has seen in thousands of years. Sorry? I guess I won't be getting laid anytime soon. You'll be making it up to me. That wasn't a request, but a statement of fact. I'll think of something. You'd better. Are you all right? Bo's eyes softened a bit. Nothing permanent. I can't say the same for too many of my people. It's been a couple of hours since I regained consciousness, and the first thing I did after making myself an alchemical cocktail to help in my recovery was to request a status report. Crimson made a number on us. Half the fleet was going to need some dock time, the command structure was shot to hell, and the Republic was going bonkers over what I did a couple of days ago. Just peachy. You didn't take any Mandalorians with you. You left us all behind. This was a Sith and Republic mess, and the price to clean it up was ours to pay, not Mandalore's, I countered. Bo studied me for a long moment before nodding. I understand. However, some won't agree with your arguments. Can't be helped, I shrugged. When are you coming back? I still need to sort the mess here and make sure Crimson is really gone this time. I'll be sending the damaged ships back to Corellia and go hunt down the Criffing thing. Between 2 weeks and a month, depending on what happens on my end and what the Separatists do in the meantime. Did you see Zash's interview? Bo asked. Her what? The hell? She wasn't supposed to reveal herself just yet. My wife smirked and explained, Love, I'll call you later. I need to figure out how much more complicated my life just became. I groaned. So you two didn't plan it? Bo inquired. Certainly not Zash revealing herself this early. I grumbled. She introduced herself as a simple scientist. Any Jedi who saw the records about me would recognize the name. Criffit, this might push the bastards over the edge. We needed them to lay low for the next month or two at least. I need to talk with Palpatine. I'll call you later and find a way to make up to you. Love you, bye. I cut the channel and called Palpi. The Criff were those two thinking. RK equals. Confederate Military HQ, Raxulon City, Raxus. San Hill stared at the self-proclaimed Old Republic Jedi in orbit. The man had acted polite enough when requesting to talk with someone in authority on the matters of an alliance against the Republic. Jared Perrion was the Jedi's name, and he admitted that his people were the ones responsible for the war escalating. Some of them used to be a part of the Confederacy before they found out that Dooku was a Sith and began causing trouble. It sounded almost plausible. After all the trouble you've caused us, why would we even consider an alliance instead of blowing you up? Ilroth asked. I'm not asking you to trust me. After Dooku betrayed you all, I'm not expecting that. All I'm asking you is to work beside you to bring the Republic down. Jared spoke quietly. Did you see that interview by Zash on GNN? The Jedi changed the topic. Most people in the galaxy saw it by now, Hill said. That's Vale's master. If I had any doubts that the Republic hasn't become a Sith playground, her presence confirms it. The Jedi took a deep breath. I know you have no reason to believe anything I tell you. All I'm asking you for an opportunity to prove that I'm an enemy to the Republic. Perrion smiled. I can offer you an equalizer. You lack Force users. I can offer you a battalion worth of them. While all but a few aren't as well trained as Jedi, they're good enough to tie them up and give your commanders a free rein. I can also offer a regiment of veteran special forces led by a cadre of Old Republic Jedi. We're a force multiplier that can turn the tide of any ground engagement. Given enough time, I can train even more Force adepts to counter the so-called Jedi and eventually suppers them. You'll need my help to handle Vale and his master. Stay put, Master Perrion. We'll discuss your proposal. Hill cut the comm. Thoughts? It's a setup, Vombra stated. Even if the Jedi is telling the truth, we can't trust him. Trust? Not necessary. Use him, and if he proves problematic, dispose of him. Admiral Trench said. Keep the man at distance. Don't meet with him or his agents. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. At best, they will be useful. At worst, they will be where we can reach them instead of working from the shadows. I concur. A battalion of Jedi equivalents? Too good to be true. We need to spring this trap and see what awaits us. Admiral cursed greed. I don't trust any Jedi, Sith, or other space wizards, Ilroth declared. However, you're right. We need to know more. If they're useful, we'll use them for the time being. If not, see to it that they can't be a problem ever again, the Neimodean ordered. I would prefer to keep this complication as far away from us as possible, but I'll support your position. Hill grumbled. As if the Criffing Sith weren't enough. That man admitted that he and his people had committed treason, Admiral Tonith said. Let's make sure that their end is useful. The so-called Jedi gave us a reason to act against him and his minions when we deem it convenient. So we all concur, Hill asked. A chorus of agreements, some half-hearted, followed. How are we going to use Perrion's forces? Hill asked. Under our command on assault ships that can't cause much damage even if taken over. We'll keep them jammed, just in case they try to warn the Republic or something, Trench said. I can use such troops on Kamino, General Farstar offered. They might be invaluable in taking out the shield generators and retrieving the samples that are our primary objectives. It's decided then. We offer Perrion a chance to prove himself. The cyborg grumbled. So be it. Moments later, a comm channel was established. You've decided already? The Jedi looked surprised. We aren't the Senate. Hill scoffed. We have a proposition. You'll be placing the forces you offered under our tactical command. We'll give you an opportunity to prove yourself. Acceptable. You won't regret this. Perrion smiled. I'm already regretting it, Vombra whispered. All that went through his voice modulator was a quiet hiss. You understand we'll have to take precautions to avoid vital intelligence reaching the Republic? Trench asked. I expected as much. You don't trust me or mine and will use us as shock troops to break the enemy. We've done it before. We'll be fine. The Jedi shrugged. Now let's discuss the details. 134th Interlude, Various 3. Interlude, Intelligence Woes 2, equals RK equals. Oni cruiser Unto Dawn, high orbit above Coruscant. Officially, Director Yili was observing the effectiveness of an upgraded scanner born from the cooperation between SIB and Oni. The real reason why was in space was to meet Fel along with a pair of Jedi and a prisoner who was still supposed to be days away from the capital. The test itself was real and would be commencing in a few minutes. Meanwhile, the two directors, the Jedi and their prisoner, were seated around a small table in a briefing room and listening to Dooku's story. Marek groaned when the former Jedi finished. "I would require him to go through a proper interrogation, but I've done my homework. We're likely to get much less out of him than you." "How credible is that story?" Yil asked. "As far as we can tell, it's the truth as he knows it." Kota nodded at the crippled Count. "That certainly is a lot to swallow," Fel murmured. The Twi'lek rubbed her forehead and groaned. "If this is true, we've all dropped the ball." "What do we do now?" Marek frowned. From all things to fall into his lap, this armed thermal detonator took the prize. "If your concerns are valid, even solid proof won't be enough. Oh, we can use it to back our narrative, but it won't be sufficient to remove Palpatine from power. The best we can hope for is that Vale and that Zash woman are new actors, and there was just one Sith Lord working against us until recently. I know it's unlikely given all the circumstantial evidence, but even that would be bad enough," Ivan said. "We had more time to digest the information and reached similar conclusion. In the end, it's immaterial if Vale told the truth and appeared just a few months ago. He's obviously working closely with the Chancellor, and now we have another Sith who revealed herself." Windu gazed intently at the directors. "If the Force is on our side for once, that's all. 3 Sith controlling the Republic. Perhaps more waiting in the shadows. They've successfully discredited you people, though some of you did their work for them," Fel grumbled. "When everything goes to hell, we won't have much popular support." "We?" Marek asked hopefully. "I've given an oath to the Republic, to democracy. Granted, there isn't much of the latter, but that might very well be the Sith's influence. Looking at the Chancellor's actions with the expectation that he wants to build an empire, they do look quite sinister, I'll grant you that." Ivan nodded. "I don't think they trust each other, not at the beginning anyway." Marek voiced his thoughts. "Vale was the one who pointed us at possible irregularities at the Chancellor's office and was the one pushing hardest for a massive increase of Palpatine's security. It all looked obvious a few months ago." Yil trailed off. "He can't be out playing Sith with so much rotating security around." Fel chuckled. "That makes sense." Windu frowned. "We might be able to use it." "Let's be frank, this is going to be a do-or-die op," Marek stated. "We need to cover our bases and act before the Sith. At best, they will wait until the current crisis is handled before moving against the Jedi. Once you're out of the game, removing them from power will be much harder if possible at all." "That's our belief," Kota nodded. "We're certain that the clones will support Palpatine. He was the one to really commission the army after all." Dooku added his 2 credits. "Why is he here still?" Fel asked. "He's a dead man if his master wins." Windu stated the obvious. "I hope you don't intend to use him. Doing so would destroy any support we might gain otherwise." "We dismissed the idea because of that," Kota reassured the directors. "Just make sure the rest of the Jedi don't jump the gun." "I'll talk with Sylvaris and try persuading her to help us," Marek said. "We need a plan. Simply walking up to Palpatine and trying to arrest him won't work." "Perhaps," Ivan smirked. "I have an idea. =RK equals Senator Sylvaris's residence, Coruscant." It took Marek a few days to sound off some of his most reliable agents, and Kota helped ensure that they were genuine in their desire to protect the Republic at all costs, before he could be reasonably sure that he had somewhat free hand to act. Oni being on his side helped too, with a few of Fel's agents running interference. That's how he and Kota ended up talking with the Cathar senator and few of her closest allies. The presence of Mon Mothma of Chandrila was the biggest surprise. That would have concerned Illy if he didn't know why the woman had supported Vale after he became Mandalore. Chandrila was preparing for any eventuality. It remained to be seen how willing they were to act. "That's the situation." Kota finished explaining the bind they found themselves in. The senators looked uneasy at each other. "That's what I tried to warn you of all along," Sylvaris announced almost gleefully. "You did," Mothma conceded. "I've had qualms about both Palpatine's and Vale's intentions from the beginning. While at this time I'm not ready to offer open support, the senator raised a hand. I'll lay the groundwork in case we fail. Mothma looked at Kota. You're afraid that the Sith have planned this war for a long time. They have to expect that you will attempt to stop them. Yes. Windu and I believe that they will use our actions as a pretext to destroy the Jedi. That or manufacture one when they're ready, and that has to be soon. They've shown their hand. My personal belief is that Crimson blindsided them, or they would have acted against us already. The Republic is on borrowed time, Kota confirmed. Then you know there's a very real chance you'll fail, Mothma told him. We know. There was a discussion about just leaving, but doing so would mean abandoning the Republic and our duty. Kota took a deep breath. We'll do everything we can to stop the Sith. Good. That does you all a credit. Mothma nodded. However, in case you fail, we need to be prepared. Otherwise the Republic will be lost, and there might be decades, if not centuries, before it's restored. You plan a rebellion. Marek got it first. I think I can release some agents to aid you in that before we go loud. I'm sure Director Fell can do the same. Any assistance would be appreciated. Mothma nodded. Can you count on your support? Kota looked at the rest of the senators in turn. We won't suffer a resurgent Mandalore or another Sith Empire, Silvaris declared. One after another, the remaining senators voiced their agreements. The Jedi nodded. Shortly after they left, 2 of the senators suffered unfortunate accidents. The transport of one malfunctioned, and it slammed in the side of a space scrapper. The other stopped to pick up dinner and ended up with a severe infection requiring his hospitalization. The Bith soon fell into coma and never recovered. =RK equals Intelligence Woes 3 =RK equals SIB Safe House Location Classified Coruscant. The conspirators gathered into the living room of an ordinary apartment in one of the 1,000 space scrapers on Coruscant. No one paid much attention to the sparse old furniture and just sat around the table in the corner of the room farthest from the covered windows. Good news, I hope? Director Fell asked. I've been able to keep a lid on things so far. Master Teen nodded. There shouldn't be any accidents before we're ready. Good. We need to discuss contingencies and what we expect to achieve. Yiel began. He nodded at his colleague, want real democracy restored to the Republic. Because of our positions, both of us saw exactly how the Senate is run. We take our oaths seriously, and they aren't to an oligarchy in all but name. Our intent is to break the Sith and reform the Republic. Kota reassured the director. That's commendable. Do you really believe you'll be in a position to succeed? Fell asked. The Jedi looked at each other. If the Force is with us, ideally we'll be able to remove the Sith and avert a real civil war, Teen said. Unfortunately, I can't afford to let my mind be clouded by wishful thinking. I made that mistake once the cost was most of the public support and goodwill the Jedi had left. He admitted, realistically, we have the numbers to take out the Sith, but even with your support, the casualties will be significant. We have a battalion in the temple that's practically keeping the younger members of the Order hostages. We plan to extract them and send them into hiding. Masters Yaddle and Dralig will take care of that. We'll appreciate some support in getting them off-world. My people will handle that. I'll have a fast light cruiser and few frigates ready to get them out if everything else fails. Otherwise, it would be best if we can smuggle most of them covertly. We'll discuss the details later. Fell offered her help. Thank you, Director. Kota smiled. To be honest, we expect to be hunted down if we succeed. Currently, we lack proof that the public and majority of the Senate would accept. If we're lucky, we might be able to get such after dealing with the Sith, but by then it would probably be too late. You're aware of the consequences then, Marek noted. Yes, Teen confirmed. The alternatives are worse. We know that Zash's revelation is either arrogance or bait, perhaps both. Our best guess is that Crimson blindsided the Sith, otherwise they would have been ready to act against us by now. Some of us believe that Zash revealed herself to keep Palpatine's public support high after Atria, and to help cement the image the Sith are selling to the people at large. We concur, Fell said. Grave mistakes were made. The Sith obviously evolved while we stagnated. Teen slowly admitted. There was obvious pain in his voice as he did so. Now we're put in a position where if we act, we would likely doom the Order. However, that's the best of a lot of terrible options. If we run, which might not be successful, we would be abandoning the Republic to the Sith. We would be betraying our duty. The Jedi Master sighed. We're running out of time. The Sith already control the Republic, and it's just a matter of time before they have transformed it into the Sith Empire reborn. I don't need to explain to you what that would mean to the galaxy at large, do I? We actually paid attention to history in school, Marek said in a dry voice. I know that the two of you want us to wait until the CIS offensive loses steam. I generally agree with that sentiment. It would be for the best if the Separatists don't win the war. While they're the lesser evil compared to the Sith, they're terrible enough. However, by waiting that long, we give time for someone to slip up, or for the Sith to strike before us. What are your thoughts on the matter? Kota asked. Torn, actually. I agree. The best time to strike in order to succeed will be right in the middle of the offensive when the principal Sith will be distracted. Then there's Ivan's idea, which while dangerous can make all the difference in the world, Marek admitted. I wish it was easier. That we could use the Force to persuade enough senators to support us. Kota sighed. Leaving the moral consideration aside, that simply won't work on anyone with a stronger mind, unless we want to cause brain damage and compromise ourselves that way. I should have built support in the Senate before confronting Vale, Teen said. I was too sure of myself. I was convinced that our long service combined with the support we had left would be enough to sway the Senate, that the senators remember their history, that they knew what resurgent Sith would mean for the galaxy. I was a fool. The path to hell is paved with good intentions, Ivan muttered. I heard it said years ago, and I find it fitting. She shrugged. With the Sith around, there are more than enough bad intentions to doom at least half the galaxy. Kota scoffed. Can't say I disagree, Marek said. What's done is done, Kota declared. Now we need to deal with the consequences. =RK equals. Interlude. How to slay a monster. =RK equals. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. Black Site 34. It took 10 days to reconstitute the fleet and get here. I spent a lot of the time in talks with Palpatine and Zash. The Chancellor was actually grateful for the public support, which ensured that he just lost 10% of his approval over Atria, which meant that about 60% of the citizenry were more or less backing him up. It was little things like that which explained why he found it so easy and painless to become emperor in the other timeline. Building alliances with senators and planetary governments for decades helped a lot too, I reckon. Still, Zash's shenanigans, while useful, caused some waves. Palpi had SIB keeping a very close eye on the Jedi who were laying low after Atria. We all knew it was just a matter of time before they acted out and planned for it, though hopefully they weren't going to criff us up on the eve of the CIS offensive. At least after destroying their image, with Palpi jumping on the opportunity to make it tank even faster than the Jedi could do it by themselves, the Conservatives weren't going to get sufficient support to be a real threat. What we feared was the chaos that would ensure once our hand was forced and Order 66 went into effect. For the time being, that was Palpi's problem. He was back on Coruscant and had Zash around as a backup in case the worst happened. Kenobi was there too, along with my wife, my Mandalorians, who had starting orders to suppress any coup attempt against Palpi, unless it was my own. I had other concerns and spent the days after awakening in recovery and making myself alchemical concoctions to help me get better faster. I also had to deal with a lot of work concerning the running of the fleet. While Joanna was recovering nicely, she was far from 100%, and I had to deal with most of her duties too. We were very short-staffed even after taking in most engineers and surviving officers from the crippled ships before sending them to Corellia. Finally, we arrived. The fleet exited hyperspace on the edge of the system and began sensor sweeps. A lot of asteroids, a single planetoid, and that's it, sir, Acting Captain Horn announced after consulting with the sensor operator. Take us to the black site and commence bombardment when we're at range. I'll be doing my best to protect us all, though this time it shouldn't be nearly as bad. I certainly hope so. The young officer's face was pale, but his voice didn't waver, and he began issuing the relevant orders. I let the force flow through me and slowly began spreading my battle meditation among the critical crew. My nerves burned with the strain, and it was going to get much worse. By the time we reached orbit, I had the fleet protected as well as I could in my state. Yet I was already sweating from the strain and felt like a Sith Lord was practicing his lighting on me. What was left of Crimson was aware. It knew its doom was approaching and the criffing bug was going crazy. The force pulsed with its fury and desperation. Its presence was growing as we approached, but fortunately it was a mere pale shadow of what I faced back on Atria. Crimson struck as we entered orbit. A hammer slammed in the gestalt I had weaved from the minds of all the officer and engineers in the fleet. I snarled when my mind rang from the strike, yet what I experienced was a mere echo. I had learned my lesson the first time, and the attack spread all over the men and women in the web of the battle meditation, causing a mild headache at best. The sickness gave out an impotent scream, then the first salvo struck. It flailed against me again and again. It was like throwing small rocks in a pond. It caused wave, inconvenience, but no real harm. The plague's desperation was like a fine drink. Its impotent fury, something to enjoy. Its fear, oh, that was something I was savoring with relish. The research facility was reinforced, sturdy. However, without a planetary shield, it stood no chance against the firepower leveled against it. The rock covering it became magma. The facility itself was shacking, buckling from the shocks of the bombardment. Still, it was impressive engineering. It wasn't until the fifth salvo that Crimson felt pain and lost it. I heard it scream through the force, sensed its pain, and smiled. More salvos went in. Crimson gave one last shriek that reverberated through the force and was silenced forever. I grabbed a nearby console to steady myself and felt profound relief. "Captain, I'm pretty sure that we just got it, but continue the bombardment. I want to be sure that nothing could possibly survive down there." My smile turned into a grin. "It's fitting, I think." "What, sir?" Horn asked. "That the criffing thing died with a whimper, unable to kill anyone else." I explained. "Damn right, sir. I just wish that the Admiral didn't relapse and Cold be here to witness it personally." Horn muttered. "At least she's expected to make full recovery. That bloody thing did a number to us all." I began releasing the battle meditation slowly so I wouldn't cause shock to the people I was influencing. "Communications, open a channel to Coruscant. They can use the good news," I ordered. It was over. That criffing thing was dead. Right? 135th. Chapter 34. Part 1. Phase 34. The Confederacy Strikes Back. =RK=. Part 1. The long-anticipated Confederate offensive began with simultaneous attack all over the galaxy. It was led by over 100 munificent battle groups under the command of unrestrained tactical droids. Their targets were Republic pickets, listening posts, and patrolling ships. 6 hours later, the first heavy blows were struck. First, in the north and northeast galactic sectors, Confederate fleets fell upon Yaga Minor, Borosk, Vandermed, and Pindar. Separatist units moved to secure the far north with strikes upon Sermpidal and Bemiel. At that time, the long-feared reduction of the North Pocket began with the fleets moving to secure Ruria and Florum. Another strong Confederate force struck the Republic Navy at Mol Calamari. At the same time, in the eastern part of the galaxy, even more fleets were on the move. Almost simultaneous attacks occurred in Velmor, Roche, Naziri, and Kashyyyk. The situation in the south and southeast quadrants wasn't better. A massive Confederacy fleet established a forward supply base at Darlang before splitting up and heading to Chara and Lanik. More fleets surged to assault Lanos, Bothawui, Manda, and Rishi. In the south, the first part of Operation Dagger, ultimately aimed at Camino, went into effect. Hadessa and Christophis were struck by the leading elements of at least a sector fleet. It was soon confirmed that at least 20 independent battle groups were operating in the region too, scouting and hunting Republic shipping. Another prong of the Confederate offensive, launched hours earlier, meant to bind the Republic Navy at Naboo. That attack had two obvious aims: to connect separatist territories and prevent any further reinforcement reaching Camino. The Confederacy aimed to achieve that goal by attacking Kalindra, Rundelia, and taking control of the hyperlanes in the sector. Those attacks also cut off Malastare and Zaheth. Even more strikes were launched in the south. Their goal was to completely isolate the western quadrant, which would be assaulted the next day. Confederate units moved to secure or reinforce Utapau, Karidef, Rutan, and Brundan. Another fleet took Isla Naha and Sump, facing virtually no resistance. The next day, equal parts of a sector fleet struck Eridau, Agonma, Aitu, Noehaon, and Bomis Kaori. With those attacks, the Republic territories in the west were cut off, and the Separatists began a methodical reduction of the naval elements in the region. They declined to participate in ground campaigns unless a world held critically important resources. While most of the Republic was under heady assault or preparing for one, the eyes of the people in the core worlds were focused closer to home. While the Confederacy's operations outside the core were important, only two of them held high strategic value. First was the obvious attempt to connect their territories across the galaxy, a goal that was achieved within 2 weeks. The second, and arguably more critical, was the long-anticipated assault of Camino, which was yet to come. The primary goals of the offensive was crippling the Republic's shipbuilding and industry. Over 70% of it was concentrated in the core, and that was where the Confederacy concentrated their efforts. Their assault of the center of galactic civilization began with a heavy attack aimed at Abrigado Rey. A fleet was dispatched to Atria too. Officially, it was there to confirm that Crimson was eradicated. However, Oni believed that their true purpose was to ambush General Vale and the containment fleet he took to hunt down Crimson upon their return. The Confederacy advance towards the core began on 3 vectors. First, a sector fleet struck at Kalada and overwhelmed the defenders. The second prong struck Romamuel. Smaller fleet converged on Afa, Chardan, and Tina. Their goal was to connect the Confederate western and central sectors in a third place. The third prong was a controversial on. As expected, another massive fleet Antar. In the same time, Trade Federation units supposedly neutral in the conflict, or even backing the Republic, broke from their defensive positions at Neimoidia and Cato Neimoidia to attack Outlaw, thus cutting off Antar as well as Comenor and Balmora. The net effect of that treason was that Quat would be in a striking distance when the fleet from the central sector reduced the Antar's defenses. At the same time, Confederate holdouts in the core like Kola, Castel, Scarco, and Null attempted a breakthrough, thus tying up Republic forces. For all its ferocity, those attacks were merely a taste of what was yet to come. A Confederate fleet was moving upon Mandalore. Once Kalada fell, the sector fleet from Fondor was headed straight at Duro, where the Republic Navy had been fortifying its positions. If that world fell, only New Plumpto would stand between them and Corellia. Extract from History of the Clone Wars, Volume 2. Published by Coburn Naval Academy, Coruscant, =RK equals SIB Safehouse. Location classified, Coruscant. Yoda's mouth tasted like ashes, those of the Jedi Order, of the Republic and democracy itself. It tasted of his failure as a Grandmaster of the Jedi Order. Not what you expected, is it? Dooku wheezed. The Jedi Master stepped away from his shacking former apprentice. Yoda had to confirm what he had been told for himself. No matter that Kota and Windu had scanned Dooku's mind multiple times, it went without saying that none of them took the Sith at his word. However, there were ways to ensure he was telling the truth. The Count had to keep his mind open without accessing the Force or struggling in any way. Even with his cooperation, it was a delicate and dangerous procedure, one that required complete trust or sheer desperation to undergo, because it was trivial for the one making the scan to shatter the mind they were examining either by mistake or on purpose. It wasn't something undergone lightly, even when everyone agreed the procedure could be described as a mind rape, a violation of a person's deepest, darkest secrets, their very being. Yoda frowned at his former apprentice. He saw the truth and found it hard to believe. It was even harder to come to terms with what he felt from Dooku. The former Jedi was an impossible contradiction. The Count felt serene, at peace, despite the multiple time he let his mind be violated. Dooku didn't do it because he regretted his actions. Oh, there was regret in the man's heart, but it was about the way he had been played, that he had lost his power. Dooku saw himself as a dead man walking, and all he wanted was vengeance. The only way open to him was to come clean, and he did precisely that. Yoda could see the truth in Dooku's mind, could feel that those memories were genuine. That made it no less hard to swallow. The Grandmaster had been working with the Chancellor ever since Palpatine had been elected. In all that time, he never suspected the man of being a Sith, just another power-hungry politician, if more competent than most. Now that he knew, Yoda could see all the pieces falling into place. The Jedi had been pawns ever since Naboo. The purpose of that invasion was obvious now: ensure Palpatine's election and strike a blow at the Trade Federation, one that in time would drive it to be a part of the Confederacy. How many deceptions were there? How many lies? Palpatine, Vale, Zash. Were those all the Sith? Yoda groaned. The Gar. It was a Sith creation, and it had a battalion sitting in a Jedi temple that had been turned into a death trap, with the consent of the Order no less. With his consent. Foolish I was. Unfit to lead the Jedi I am, Yoda admitted. He looked sadly at Kota and Windu. My fault this is. The Jedi Master sagged in his seat. The offensive began 12 hours ago. Vale is cut off, Windu said. There are only 2 Sith we know of on Coruscant. Kota added. Yoda looked at the crippled man he trained. Sufficient evidence we have not. Number, even if we had something that would be accepted, Palpatine has been in power for a long time. He'll be able to tie us in procedures and other legalities until he can act against us if we try removing him legally. If our evidence is believed in the first place. Windu told his nominal leader, evidence which we're conspicuously lacking. If it wasn't for the directors knowing what was possible with the Force and believing our explanation, we would be in even worse position, Kota said. They have their own agenda, that much is obvious, Windu pointed out. However, I'm sure they will fight to avoid the Sith turning the Republic into an empire. They believe in democracy. Democracy, you say? Yoda shook his head. Treason we discuss. That's one way to look at it. Removing a traitor who began a war for his own gain is another. Windu shrugged. Dark the future is. The end of the Jedi nears, I fear, Yoda whispered. We're afraid of that. We seek your guidance, now that you know the truth, Master Yoda. We can't not act. Kota pleaded. The Sith will destroy us at their convenience if we keep our heads low. If we run, we abandon the Republic and its citizens to a slavery under the Sith. And if we act, the most likely outcome is that we would be hunted by the army, even if we succeed, Windu added. Tien and his buddies should have waited, gathered sufficient support, never gone over your head. Kota shrugged. What is done is done. We can't change the past. We should learn from our mistakes. Unfortunately, it's simply too late. We should reflect on our past misdeeds if we survive. Now we should make sure there are surviving Jedi to learn from our mistakes. Trap this could be, Yoda muttered. We know. It's one we have to spring. Windu nodded. If we wait, we die for nothing. If we act, we have a chance. Even if we fail, even if the Republic loses, at least we might ensure that the Sith don't win. That will be better for the galaxy than the alternatives. The Seps winning will be better than a Sith ruining everything. Their power will be easier to break than that of an emperor. Kota agreed. For the first time in hundreds of years, Yoda abandoned the speech pattern that he was accustomed to while speaking basic. You want me to lead you in what undoubtedly is going to be the destruction of the Jedi Order? A mighty frown appeared on the ancient Jedi's face. The Order I failed. A quiet, bitter chuckle escaped Yoda's lips, while 2 Jedi and a Sith stared at him, as if he had just admitted to be a Sith himself. Old I am. Steeped in my ways I am. Lead you I shall not. Yoda paused and examined the pair of Jedi. Bring to safety the younglings we shall. Abandon Coruscant we will. Stand against the Sith beside you I will. Yoda nodded. He could sense the profound relief Mace and Ram experienced at announcement. May the Force be with us. Yoda whispered and closed his eyes. He knew what his choice meant. The Jedi, his Jedi, were going to pay the price for their hubris. A terrible price. The Republic might not survive the coming storm. It was sickening that he might be the one to destroy a nation he fought to protect for centuries. The alternative was worse. Yoda was old enough to remember the devastation of the Sith Wars. He heard many stories from survivors telling him what hellish existence was to survive under Sith rule. Yoda knew they told him the truth. He saw the scars upon their bodies. He felt those left upon their wounded minds. Yoda simply couldn't step aside and leave the Sith in power, no matter the consequences. 136. Chapter 34, Part 2. Phase 34, The Confederacy Strikes Back. RK equals. Part 2, Flag Bridge, Corellian Cruiser Freedom, Unknown Regions. The compartment was mostly empty. Most of the people manning the stations during our first encounter with Crimson were either dead, insane, or spread through the fleet to bolster the crew. That left me alone with Joanna, who was sitting next to me at the tactical table. The holotank, usually showing us the fleet disposition, was busy projecting a map of the galaxy, complete with color-coded territories controlled by each side. There were a lot of crimson lines showing the first stages of the Separatists' offensive. The map was flanked by the ghostly figures of Obi-Wan and Valentra. Both of them looked ragged, and the enemy attacks began just 12 hours ago. That was time wasted, because my fleet actually missed the news. We were traveling through a region of space where there was no way to reach the holonet, especially while in hyperspace. It was fortunate that when we exited back into real space to begin the next leg of our journey, a call from Coruscant came through, otherwise we would be in even nastier position. That's not good, I stated after I could digest everything I saw on the map. Valentra chuckled grimly. That's a charming little understatement. There are a lot of indications that our estimates were conservative. Oni's pretty sure that the enemy has about a sector fleet worth of munificence, more than we expected, and they're going to throw them all in our teeth. There's no way we're getting back to the core the way we came, Joanna concluded. You'll have to fight multiple enemy fleets to break through. Attrition alone will see most of your command destroyed. Kenobi agreed. Which plan did you choose? I asked. Red one for the western quadrant. My brother-in-law answered, staging areas Arabesh and Beth. I looked back at the map. The first was Bespin, and I couldn't recall the other. It didn't really matter, I would check up later. Arabesh it is then. We'll need to refuel somewhere, and that's the best place. I'll take command of the fleet there, and then we'll have to fight our way out of the pocket. It will depend on the circumstances where we'll be heading after that. I outlined my rough plan. That's at least 10 days if you're lucky. Obi-Wan frowned. It's a good thing that the Fury didn't make its way to the black site originally through the core, and we have the nav data. Otherwise we would have to sit out this one. Holt grumbled. Let's just hope that the hyperroutes haven't have to pass through at least 2 less than stable regions. Kenobi's frown deepened. Can't be helped, I'm afraid. Where do you need me when we get out of here? I asked. Obi-Wan looked away, at his own map, I guess. Attempt to reinforce either Naboo or Kamino if they still hold. I won't hold my breath for the former, but the latter will have come under assault just a few days before you can get in the region. We heavily reinforced the area, and the Separatists will need to fight their way through multiple fortified systems unless they want to be cut off and struck from behind, Valentra suggested. Operational Plan Black, then. I nodded in understanding. That was basically an admission that the South Quadrant would be at least temporarily cut off, and a lot of defending fleets would be ordered to fall back towards Kamino. General Vale, we'll have our hands full and won't be able to send any more reinforcements to the mid and outer rim. Obi-Wan spoke formally. Once you reach Arabesh and get out of the pocket, I'm authorizing you to take command of the south area of operations and ordering you to do everything you can to protect Kamino. Orders understood and accepted, General Kenobi. If this is all, I would like to speak with my wife before we're out of range. I'll patch you through. May the Force be with you. Obi-Wan nodded. Try not to get killed and bring as many of our boys and girls back as you can. Valentra straightened up and saluted. I got to my feet and saluted back. Joanna followed suit a moment later. May the Force serve you well, both of you. I'll let you be. Holt nodded and left the flag bridge. A few minutes later, I was looking at Bo. My wife was in a full armor sans helmet and looked less than pleased. Delkatar, it's good to see you again. You look better. At least she sounded warmer than the last time we talked. I'm recovering as well as can be expected. How are you? Pissed off. It's all but guaranteed that the Seppies will hit Mandalore soon. I need to be there. Mandalore needs you and your warriors where you are, Bo. If what we fear comes to pass, your presence might be vital. Without the Republic, we're criffed. We need powerful allies, especially while our fleet just begins to be rebuilt. I smiled sadly. I know that your heart aches to be on the front lines, that you want to feel the rush of battle. Damn right. I've been cooped here for more than a month now, and I'm feeling useless. My wife grumbled. I know why you need us here, Mandalore. It doesn't make the waiting easier to bear. Are you going to be all right? I saw the intelligence reports. Abrigado Rai will fall soon if it hasn't already. They are going to cut you off. I'll be taking another route. Unfortunately, I'll be out of contact for some time before we can get out of the unknown regions, and after that, we'll be keeping a low profile until we're ready to strike the enemy. I tried to reassure Bo. I hoped, but certainly didn't expect that there would be this much affection between us so soon after our political marriage. I wouldn't call it love, not yet. But I've grown to care about my wife and found out that I was missing her company. Unless I was mistaken, it was mutual too. Try not to get yourself killed, Mandalore. Bo gave me a wan smile. I want my husband back. We're one together. Then I have my running orders, dear. Stay safe. We're one when parted. My wife's image wavered and distorted before vanishing in the telltale signs of jamming. The enemy had gotten close to the relay station used to maintain the connection. I stared at the empty space where hollow projection used to be. It was strange. Until not too long ago, all I had in this time was my mission. A mission I'm pretty sure I stopped caring a long time ago. Even if I ever came back, I'm not sure how much I could care about Earth. After more than 60 years spent in this galaxy, I was a radically different man. I knew that back in the Empire, however, I tried quite hard not to think about the implication. The entity that sent me here had to know how my experiences would change me. I'm pretty sure it counted on it. I frowned. It's been years since I thought about this, yet it was fitting. The last time was after I fell in love with Ashara and finally fully accepted that this galaxy had become my home. Now I found myself in a similar situation. This wasn't my time. I had no real stake in the fate of the factions tearing at each other. I've been going through the motions, that much it was easy to admit to myself. I had goals, vague plans that constantly changed to fit the circumstances. However, my heart simply wasn't in the game I was forced to play. A small smile crept on my face. Somewhere along the way, things changed. Was it marrying Bo, becoming Mandalore, fighting with the people under my command, touching their minds through my battle meditation? I wasn't sure. It was probably a combination of all those factors. For months, I've been existing in this time. The same was true for the years that followed Ashara's murder. At least back then I had my vengeance to drive me. By some cosmic twist, or more likely force shenanigans, I still could avenge my first wife. However, now I had something else to look up to, a reason to actually live, a reason to fight beyond the sheer joy that combat against worthy opponents could bring. More importantly, I finally had a very real, tangible reason to win this war I was fighting, to ensure I got enough power that no one dared criff up with me and mine. My smile became sinister. Soon, very soon, the galaxy was going to meet Darth Vader, and my enemies would get their just reward. But first, I had to deal with this offensive. Then the Jedi, Senate, and eventually Sidious, once I would be in position to hijack his empire. Achieving anything less would be unacceptable. RK equals CIC, CIS Command Ship Conqueror. Radnor, TK-51, was glad that the Confederacy's ship designers finally took a file from the Republic shipbuilders, and the majority of the CIS Navy no longer was commanded from exposed and vulnerable bridges. Too many ships were left with the old configuration, however they were all exclusively munificence and thus expendable. Most of them were dedicated for kamikaze roles anyway, so it wasn't a great loss. The tactical droid surveyed the CIC, which was exclusively manned by now obsolete B-1s. Good enough to cruise ship, if properly supervised, The cheap mass-produced models were outclassed by practically everything else in the arsenal of both friends and foes. The droid gave out an electronic sigh before plugging itself in the combat network, binding his command together. The BattleNet was an invention that came from the Techno-Union. It began as an upgrade of the Umbrella system, meant to bind together the defensive and offensive systems of a group of ships, and thus increasing their efficiency. Then someone was bright enough to figure out that the BattleNet could be used to enhance the capabilities of the droid armies too. TK-51 was spearheading the attack on the small ocean world of Radna as a means to test those presumptions and some other pieces of equipment. The droid commanded another small fleet, his command ship and 25 munificents. The frigates carried 100 modified Vulture fighters apiece, giving him 2,600 of the small craft to play with. Against him were arrayed 3 Venators, an Acclamator and 10 CR-90 frigates as escorts. Those were by no means suicidal odds, at least when compared to TK-51's first mission after his software was upgraded. However, his fleet was still on the wrong end of the firepower and durability equation. The powers that be had decided that such a correlation of forces was suitable for the tests they wanted him to run. Unless this time the tactical droid had longer to plan. TK-51 has been aware of his objective for 2 weeks now, and Radna had been under covert observation all the time. Even if the Republic brought reinforcements, there were heavy forces waiting to jump them, which left the droid to deal only with the expected system defense fleet. Being a part of the BattleNet was different. TK-51 was connected with every single droid running his ships, the Vultures, and had filtered channels to the sensor feeds and tactical computers of his fleet. There was no direct connection with those ship systems for security reasons, even if there were multiple powerful computers and cyber defense droids plugged in to keep intruders out of the network. TK-51 agreed completely with those restrictions. He couldn't afford to have his whole fleet and crew compromised if the enemy had some kind of countermeasure for BattleNet. For TK-51, being a part of the network meant he became something both more or less. The droid's individuality was watered down as he became a piece of a partial gestalt made by the electronic minds of his subordinates. The sheer amount of data and processing power they had at their fingertips was staggering. He could see through the sensors of the fleet. He could feel solar wind upon the armored skin of the Vultures landed upon his ship's hulls. TK-51 paused. If he could, he would have smiled. He could feel. That was a new sensation, and he found it enjoyable. Multiple parts of the Gestalt warned the tactical droid that the Republic Navy was on the move. They launching fighters and bombers, which were assuming defensive positions. The frigates moved forward to form a screen in front of the capital ships. The Venators formed a rhomboid formation with the Acclamator in front and cruisers taking the other points of the geometric figure. All TK-51 needed to do was to think his orders. They were picked up by the BattleNet, and his subordinates knew what to do. There was no need of inefficient verbal commands. A wave of anticipation went through the Vultures, and they launched into a single swarm that formed around the fleet. The frigates lit up their engines at full military thrust and headed straight at the enemy. Firing solutions were refined, and thanks to BattleNet and their vectors, TK-51's fleet could concentrate all its forward power at just 2 targets. That would soon change as the distance fell. However, it was at least an order of magnitude better than what could be achieved without the network. It was just too bad that TK-51 had given different targeting parameters. His fleet locked on and unleashed its firepower upon the 4 leading enemy frigates before they could enter effective range of the Vultures, which were their primary target. The CR-90s went evasive, and due to the distance, most shots missed. However, there was enough concentrated firepower to drain shields and cause shock damage through bleed-through. The third salvo saw a frigate stagger before breaking to pieces. Then the range fell close enough that the fire became more effective. The tactical droid noted that the Republic cruisers were already launching missiles, dozens of anti-fighter ones, followed by heavy concussion ones aimed at his ships. Soon enough, another theory would be tested. The Republic cruisers opened fire with their primary weapons, and the Vultures followed their orders to pull out of the way. Another CR-90 was destroyed, and finally the missiles were in range. More than 100 fire control computers spread over the munificents acted as one thanks to BattleNet. They designated their targets and opened fire at the approaching light missiles. Counter-missiles were launched against the incoming heavy ordnance. The Vultures acted next and broke off, keeping the distance open. Their experimental AMS systems opened fire and spears made of coherent light stabbed at the incoming missiles. The first two enemy salvos were significantly degraded by both active defenses and ECM. TK-51 felt only 30 Vultures die before his fleet entered effective range, and he shifted targeting priorities. 18 Munificents unleashed their firepower at the Acclamator leading the charge, while the rest of the fleet continued to target the remaining 5 CR-90S. At the same time, the Vultures changed vectors, fired their afterburners, and charged the 2 Venators at the flanks. The enemy small craft acted promptly and flew in to intercept them. TK-51 thought another order, and the Umbrella system finally unleashed its own anti-fighter missiles. An unpleasant sensation stabbed through the tactical droid's mind when the enemy concentrated their fire on the Munificent leading his fleet. The frigate's shields flared in a futile attempt to deflect, disperse, and absorb the incoming firepower before it became too much, and the system shut down to protect itself from a meltdown. The next barrage hit unopposed, and the Munificent's armor was never intended to take such punishment. It ablated, boiled, or even vaporized in places. Decks were opened to space, weapons and power lines were blown apart. The ship listed under the sheer kinetic energy of the strike. Then a second barrage struck, and it broke the Munificent's back, and the frigate disintegrated. TK-51 froze for a moment when M-355 was destroyed. The loss of all those droids, processing power and data, diminished the gestalt and gave him pause. It took it precious seconds to recover, which were fatal for the leading Vulture squadrons. They failed to launch the missiles added to their wings or continue with their evasive maneuvers and were blown up by enemy fire. Fortunately, the pause had no effect on the Umbrella, which was acting primary in automatic mode. Its missiles streaked in and went after their targets. The Republic fighters launched decoys, dispersed, and their rear gunners attempted to shoot down the incoming ordnance. The Vultures jumped at the opportunity that presented itself and launched missiles of their own before closing into gun range. TK-51 had to admit that the enemy pilots handled the situation better than the droid fighters during their first encounter with the Guardian system. They obviously had thought how to handle the situation. Dispersal, radical vector changes, decoys. The tactic was certainly more effective than what the Vultures had attempted at Ryloth and Geonosis. Unfortunately for the clones, they had hundreds of missiles coming at them from 2 directions, followed by more than 2,000 droid fighters. In contrast, the Republic managed to launch only 550 torrents in the first place. While the clones extracted their pound of flesh, it was still a slaughter. 2/3 of their fighters were blown up before the Vultures closed the range, and the rest died in the crossfire that followed. Despite that, there were only 1,900 droid fighters left to approach the Republic ships. They had to contend with the Guardian system on their own. The Vulture's AMS system were much less effective during the final approach. 700 of the fighters were destroyed when the Republic capital ships put their launchers into sprint mode and emptied their magazines at the approaching swarm. The remaining 1,200 Vultures slammed into a wall of flak fire augmented by turbo laser cannons set to flare their plasma shots as an improvised anti-fighter weapon. Even that wasn't enough. Almost 700 droid fighters survived to make their attack runs, and TK-51 had kept those armed with proton torpedoes in the back of the formation. Each carried only 2 apiece and launched them before going into suicide attacks. Final defensive fire blew up more than half of the remaining Vultures and even 1/3 of the proton torpedoes. Thanks to blinding concentrated ECM and the wild evasive maneuvers prior and during launch, some of the ordnance missed. More than 500 torpedoes slammed into the flanks of the targeted Venators. Armor shattered, whole turrets blew up, and the ships were engulfed by a short-lived firestorm. It took mere moments to outrun it and reveal the extent of the damage. The ships were listing, their sides were open to space and either burning or leaking atmosphere. At least half their weapons were gone, and the damage to power systems was extensive enough to disable their shields. TK-51 shifted fire from the finally crippled Acclamator to the gutted Venators and concentrated half his fleet on each. Even if he had already lost 2 more munificents with a third heavily damaged, it was all but over. 2 minutes later, the tactical droid had reduced the Republic fleet to 3 wrecks drifting in space, 10 expanding clouds of debris, and a single Venator that was changing vectors in an obvious attempt to flee to hyperspace. TK-51 sent another order, and 3 of his frigates jumped in front of the cruiser, thus blocking its escape. The next order changed targeting priorities to disable the enemy weapons and launch boarding parties. TK-51 relaxed and began compiling an AAR while overseeing the mop-up operations and analyzing the battle so he could do better next time. He had to. Feeling droids and ships die through the battlenet wasn't something he wanted to experience any more than absolutely necessary. The tactical droid was sure that its subordinates who were part of the network agreed. He could see their thoughts and feel their emotions after all. =RK equals. Plan Red 1, Western Quadrant. All Republic naval forces are to disperse. Capital ships and appropriate escorts are to fall back to designated staging areas. Light elements are to harry and, if practical, slow down enemy advance. Ground forces are to hold positions until either relieved or their situation becomes untenable. In the latter case, they're to either surrender or begin guerrilla warfare, depending on the circumstances. Operational Plan Black. Only critical areas in the Central Galactic Quadrant would be defended. All other fleet elements will fall back towards Kamino and implement defense in depth. Further, heavy reinforcements will be dispatched from the core worlds before the CIS offensive begins, and the hyperlanes leading to Kamino could be cut. Staging Area Arubesh, Bespin. Staging Area Beth, Nothoyan. 137th, Chapter 34. Part 3. Phase 34, The Confederacy Strikes Back. =RK equals. Part 3, Tipoca City, Kamino. Ah, home, sweet home. Echo pumped a fist in the air after he stepped out of the acclimator that brought them back. A sheet of rain that had more in common with a wave slapped him in the face, and he began to cough and splutter to his brother's amusement. No place like home, as long as you remember to keep your helmet on outside. Fives laughed. Guys, let's not make ourselves look like a bunch of morons. Rex groaned and pointed at the hangar where the elements of the 55th Army Group were marching in. There were a few squads of cadets gawking at the disembarking clones and heavy equipment. Fives got out of the rain and shook his head to remove as much of the water as possible. Come on, we need to report in, settle our gear, and book a training ground to test our implants, Rex ordered. As you say, boss. Boomer's voice well boomed over the commotion. You heard the commander, get moving. We hear you, there's no need to scream. Echo shot back and promptly followed the orders. Getting a free route to the armory and then barracks took longer than it should have, thanks to all the clones being deployed to the city. Finally, 501st's command squad stowed their arms and went to put down the rest of the gear. On the way to the barracks, they passed by cadet squads heading for training. You remember that? Target practice I recon, Echo pointed out. Do I ever? Fives smiled wishfully. Those were good times when our troop was whole. Hey, is that 99? Echo exclaimed and pointed down the corridor. There, behind another group of cadets, shambled a hunchback clone loaded with a bunch of heavy blasters. The man stumbled and the weapons spilled from his grip. Hey, 99. You all right? Echo grinned and went to aid the man who helped his first squad pass their training qualifications just as the war was starting. Echo. Fives. 99 exclaimed and grinned at his brothers. You actually remember us? Fives grinned back. I remember all my brothers. 99 frowned. Where are the others? He asked. Echo and Fives looked at each other and grimaced. Skywalker and the Clankers happened. Fives spat. All the clones in earshot grumbled at hearing that name. Heavy died on Rishi's moon saving our SS. The rest were killed because of Skywalker, Echo explained. 99's expression fell. He cast his eyes at the floor and sighed before looking back up. Why are you back here? There's many people arriving lately, but no one's telling me anything. 99 explained sadly. The Clankers are launching a major offensive, and they will be throwing everything they can at Kamino. We're here to protect our home, Rex explained. So you're the one who helped those two pass? Well done, brother. Rex finally spoke. 99 beamed at the praise, then became serious. How can I help? He straightened up as much as he could and asked. That's the spirit, Boomer exclaimed and went to clap 99 on the back, nearly sending him to the floor. Equals RK equals CIC Republic Star Destroyer Victoria, Victory 1 class. 3rd Corps Fleet flagship. High orbit above Duro, Admiral Dow sat in this chair in the CIC, far away from the captain, so they wouldn't distract each other while doing their respective jobs, and glared at the hollow image of the world he was tasked to protect. No one with my name should be defending Duro of all places. The Admiral grumbled quietly. I can already hear all the dumb quips that will result of this mess. If anyone heard him, they wisely refrained from saying anything and instead concentrated on doing their jobs. Why I couldn't be at either Corellia or Quat like Plo Koon and Coburn? I'll gladly go to the Outer Rim and swap places with either Yularen or Adi Mundi. Dow shook his head in a futile attempt to chase off his dark thoughts and returned his attention to the big holotank showing the disposition of his forces. There was a Gar army group, the 44th deployed on Duro, along with a Kamasi armor division. With those forces backing the locals, the planet should be a tough nut to crack, at least as long as the planetary shields could be kept running. The Admiral's concerns were in space, which was his responsibility. He had a powerful fleet under his command, a brand new flagship that was upgraded after some vital lessons were learned when Vale rushed the first partially operational victory in combat, and most importantly, he could rely on some pretty heavy fixed defenses. While Duro was a pretty important world with plenty planet-side industry that needed to be preserved, the primary reason why Dow was deployed here was simple. He was to slow down and bleed the enemy by using all the fortifications built by the Duros. If practical, he was to fall back to the last stop before Corellia and repeat the exercise, withdraw behind the planetary shields, or if things got sufficiently criffed up, fight and die while dragging as much of the Confed fleet to hell alongside his command. Admiral Dow had deployed a third of his ships facing the direction of Kalada, and they constantly maneuvered to keep it that way and compensate for the stellar drift while keeping station under the defense coverage of Golan stations. The rest of the fleet was close to the planet itself and ready to bring the hammer down in case the enemy was arrogant enough to jump behind the outer defenses and attempt to bypass them. While unlikely because such a maneuver would put any attacker under the concentrated fire of the Republic fleet and both defense ring, the Admiral wasn't going to dismiss such a stunt as impossible. The Confederacy was going to outnumber him significantly, and if they were willing to absorb the casualties and his fleet was holding the outer position, it would be him who would be sandwiched by two enemy forces and torn apart. Sir, we've got a call from Coruscant for you. It's General Kenobi. The clone manning the comms reported. Patch him to my station. Dow pressed a button, a terminal built in the armrest of his seat, and a small hologram appeared in front of him. General Kenobi, sir. The Admiral saluted. At ease, Admiral. Obi-Wan returned the gesture with a practiced ease. One of Oni's scouts managed to get away from Kalada and beamed a report just an hour ago. The former Jedi looked grim. It's confirmed that the Confederacy is sending a full sector fleet your way. Then I'll be unable to hold Duro. Do my orders stand? Dow asked. He was unfazed by the confirmation. High Command had expected this kind of outcome. They do. Hold the line for as long as practical and bleed them. We can't release our reserves until we know where the enemy primary blow will fall, Kenobi confirmed. We've been forced to send some reinforcements to hold Balmora, because if that world falls, the enemy will be in position to attack Feldale and block our direct route to Quat. Is there something else I need to know? Dow asked. We believe Antar is still holding, but it won't be long after the assault on Outlaw cut them off. The last report we got was that the reconstituted Confederacy Third Fleet was attacking, and the leading elements of a sector fleet were arriving. Kenobi grimaced. Romamul has fallen, and the Separatists' Central Sector Fleet is advancing on Danoon. We can't release our reserves until we know for sure if they will move on Corellia or Kuat from there. That fleet's destination will determine where they'll concentrate. It's as we expected, Dow nodded. It doesn't make the waiting for the blow to come any easier. I have a request from both Valentra and Gergerod. Try to keep your flagship in one piece and send us report on her performance. Try not to get killed too. This war already has more than enough dead heroes. If I die, it won't be for lack of trying to stay in one piece. I want to go of old age, surrounded by my children who are listening to my war stories. Dao chuckled. May the Force be with you, Admiral. Kenobi out. The same to you, sir. Dao saluted. Now all he could do was wait. His forces were in position and he had multiple plans ready. RK equals. It was early the next day when the first Fondor sector fleet arrived. 60 Munificent led the way. They launched a swarm of vultures which dispersed and began sensor sweeps. A few minutes later, the main body of the enemy fleet arrived, and the numbers made Dao curse. There was no way in hell the Republic could stop them, short of the massive defenses being built at Corellia and the multiple fleets gathering there. RK equals. Republic Detention Center, Coruscant. Anakin was getting stir-crazy and criffing bored. He had spent more than a month in prison, with the only thing disrupting his monotone existence being Padme's rare visits, and each visit to the court. Only his wife and attorney gave him any news of the outside world. At least now he knew what that terrible disturbance and screams through the Force were about. Even thinking about Crimson and how close it came to destroying the galaxy, to killing his Padme, made him fit to be tied. He should have been out there, beside his wife, where he could protect her against anything. There were other news, fragments heard by his guards and those that his two contacts with the outside world told him. Obi-Wan being expelled, Ahsoka being forced to basically go rogue and joining a military academy when the Council, in their great wisdom, decided that her place was to waste her time in the Agri-Corps. There were days when Anakin wondered if he was still in coma and suffering from nightmares because the outside world was making less and less sense with every new news he heard. It was just yesterday when a disturbed Padme came to visit. All she wanted was to be held and be in his company. It took him a long time to coax what happened from his wife. Naboo was under attack, and the fleet there wouldn't be able to hold long without reinforcements that simply weren't there to be sent. This time, the government and population weren't willing to keep their heads low and allow an occupation without fighting every step of the way. The Gar had been training the Naboo and Gungan volunteers, as well as shipping in enough supplies and equipment of outfit a few armies. Padme was torn. Anakin could feel that she desired for the Confederacy to pay for what they did to her, for what they were doing to the whole galaxy. At the same time, there was still a quite large part of Padme that held her principles as sacred and was disturbed, if not horrified, that her peaceful people were becoming very militant. Anakin didn't know how to respond. He personally agreed with the people of Naboo. In their shoes, he would choose to fight too, so he simply held his wife and whispered sweet nothings in her ear. Then she left all too soon, and Skywalker was again alone with an ache in his chest he couldn't place. Anakin's boredom and mussing came to an abrupt end when the door of his cell opened. He looked up from the small bed he was sitting on, and his eyes widened. Obi-Wan was right there, frowning at him. "Anakin, get up," Kenobi grumbled. "I talked with the jury. If you accept, you're sentenced to life, which is to be replaced with no less than 20 years' service in the Republic Armed Forces. If you criff up again, that sentence goes into effect, and if you try to run, lethal force will be authorized." Obi-Wan sighed. "Are you ready to get out of this hole, or do you like it in here?" "What?" That was the only thing that came out of Skywalker's mouth. "Oh, get up before I'm tempted to find you something even more mind-numbingly boring and unpleasant to do than cooling your heels in there." "What? How?" Anakin exclaimed and jumped up. "As you might have noticed, there's this pesky war going on," came the dry response. "Padme told me about the offensive." Anakin's mind finally rebooted. "This is your only chance to make up for your criff-up." Obi-Wan paused. "Anakin, please this time, think before you act, and criff up your second chance." "I'll be careful. I won't make the same mistake again." Skywalker nodded frantically. "I had much time to think about what happened, what I did." The young Jedi grimaced. "I'm still the same man, Obi-Wan. I regret the consequences of my actions. I'll carry the memory of the men whose death I caused until I die. While Padme will always be my first priority, I'll keep myself in line for her sake, if nothing else." I guess this is the best I can expect. I know where you're coming, Anakin. I might wish to say that I won't be tempted to do something dumb to keep Satine safe if it was in my power. However, a few months of marriage changed that. Still, I'll say it one final time, don't criff up again, because neither I nor Vale will be able to help you if you do. I understand, thank you. Don't be so sure about that. You need to get back into good shape fast, because I'll be shipping you out with our reserves when it becomes clear which is the Confederacy's primary target. I'll be ready. May I visit Padme, or am I confined to base and still under guard? Skywalker asked, hopeful. I'm giving you this evening free to visit your wife, but I want you ready to leave at 5 in the morning. I'll have an air car waiting for you at her apartment for you, then report to me at 6 at HQ. Thanks again, Anakin grinned. Obi-Wan moved away from the door, then appeared again and threw a bundle at Anakin. Get yourself somewhat presentable, that prison garb makes you look ridiculous. Equals RK equals GAR HQ. Coruscant. Obi-Wan returned to playing at being a supreme commander after getting Anakin out of jail. For once, there were no more bad news waiting for him. Unfortunately, that was going to change soon. The enemy had either won their first engagements and moving on their next objectives, or still fighting where a handful of fortified and well-garrisoned worlds held. Kenobi expected that the next blows will be falling either late in the evening or early tomorrow. He went next to Valentra, who was staring at a massive projection of the galaxy map. There were no change since the last he checked. It's humbling. Valentra spoke quietly so they wouldn't be overheard. For 1,000 years the Republic was unchallenged, and now we're likely to lose almost everything outside the core. The Separatists already partially achieved one of their primary objectives. Obi-Wan nodded. The map didn't lie. The Confederacy had already managed to connect their far-flung territories, and more hyperlanes were already under attack, though some of the worlds anchoring them and their defending fleets were still holding. Besides, in the core, the Republic was offering heavy resistance primary in the South Quadrant, where the routes leading to Kamino were all contested. The same went for Naboo, Rindalia, and Enarch. Special forces contested Utapau, and fleet elements were still holding Kurdo before taking a long trip towards Kamino. In the west, things were grim. While the Navy attempted to slow down the enemy at a handful of places, it was falling back in good order all across the sector. There were only two notable exceptions, Agonmar and Eridau, where both the fleet and ground forces had dug in for the long haul. The majority of the sector fleet, meant to protect that quadrant, was withdrawing towards the designating staging areas and were to wait for Vale's arrival. That's a bright spot. Valentra pointed near Hutt space. I agree. Both Awi, Rishi, and Lanos are holding strong. They know what's at stake and will make the Separatists bleed before retreating even an inch. Those worlds held the gate to one of the main routes towards Kamino and were heavily reinforced in the last weeks. So far, we're holding in the east too, but that's not surprising, Kenobi noted. That's a secondary theater for the time being. While they will go after our industrial centers in the region, we're in position to fight them head-on there. Obi-Wan paused. Well, mostly. His eyes were drawn to his new home. Mandalore stood alone and awfully exposed after the quick fall of Findar. Everyone knew that a major offensive there was imminent. The Confederacy wasn't looking up to facing the Mandalorians after they could rebuild. We've sent what we can there. Pelion seems a decent sort, and Delcatar reassured me that he has a nasty surprise waiting there, Valentra offered. He told me the same but declined to reveal any details. For obvious reasons, I didn't try pulling a rank, Obi-Wan said. Valentra chuckled at that. I would have paid good money to see that. I should be there, you know. Obi-Wan gazed at Mandalore. It's the only home I have left. My wife feels the same. At least she's safe here on Coruscant. I feel you. Valentra nodded. Equals RK equals CIC Venator Cruiser Avenger. High orbit above Mandalore. You've got what replacing the hangars, Gilad Pelion exclaimed. The freshly promoted admiral had finally fully recovered from the battle for Mandalore a few weeks back. Ever since then, he had been fiendishly busy fortifying the system. Pelion had no qualms about the groundside situation. This was Mandalore after all, and the bloody lunatics had received a lot of heavy equipment to play with, along with at least 200,000 warriors who had returned when the general called them back home. Gilad's problem was the situation in space, which was grim. The Republic had scrapped the barrel, and a pretty decent fleet had formed in bits and pieces. Unfortunately, until just today, when two supposedly Mandalorian Venator arrived, the locals had no fleet left to speak of. Pellaeon was painfully aware of that fact. He watched their navy die along with practically his whole command and his beloved Chimera. That's why he was on board the Avenger, to inspect the ship and figure out where it came from. There were some pretty obvious signs about its origin, like the fresh coat of paint above what Gilad was sure used to be Republic colors. Captain Trek, commander of the ship and one of Vale's spooks, was the dead giveaway on how the Mandalorian got those ships. The clone grinned and offered the Admiral a datapad. Those two cruisers were extensively modified. That was plain to see when he landed and found out that there was precious little hangar space left. It wasn't until he met the captain and the man brought him to the CIC that Trek finally decided to explain or show as it was the case. Pellaeon stared at the schematics on the pad and the notations about what the equipment was supposed to do. "This isn't some kind of joke? Is the weapon tested?" the Admiral asked. "Yes, though only against asteroids and a few wrecks that were write-offs. It performed up to specs," Trek declared proudly. Pellaeon didn't even try to fight the grin that stretched his face. "This changes things," Gilad said. "Well, Mandalore couldn't possibly leave his capital world while he's out there saving the galaxy from monsters out of a deranged nightmare. The Mandalorians won't stand for it." "I can see that," Pellaeon nodded. "Besides, all those basilisk droids bought the boss heaps of goodwill with the natives." Pellaeon groaned. He was trying very hard not to think about the few hundred Mandalorians taking their brand-new war droids on joyrides all over his AO. "Now all you have to do is figure out how to utilize the weapon system best before the enemy arrives. According to my agent, we can expect uninvited visitors in the next 2 days. Trek informed his nominal commander. "Damn it, I need more time to integrate all the ships the returning Mandalorians brought with them. Right now they're more of a mob instead of a fleet. That goes for the lunatics riding droids outside." Pellaeon grumbled. "That's why they pay you the big money, sir." Trek shrugged. "What big money? While my new salary is nothing to sneeze at, it isn't going to make me rich either." Pellaeon frowned and wondered if he had missed something. "Ah, right, you're still getting pay from the GAR. A shit-eating grin appeared on Trek's face. "We're getting paid by the General because we officially don't exist as far as the Republic is concerned. The boss is quite generous." "Is this a sales pitch?" Gilad frowned. "Are you open for a change of employer, perchance?" Trek countered. "You're already working for the boss anyway." RK equals. Republic Fleet protecting Duro, 3rd Corps Fleet commanded by Admiral Dow. Flagship, Victory I Star Destroyer. Victoria, the class namesake. It's the first fully upgraded and operational prototype to enter services. The rest of its division are being frantically outfitted at Kuat. The fleet consists of 10 Venator cruisers, 200 fighter 50 bombers each, 21 acclimator assault ships, 9 dreadnought heavy cruisers, 15 light cruisers, 44 CR-90 frigates, outer defense ring, 12 Golan Arms battle stations circling the planet protected by minefields and 50 platforms each. Orbital defenses, 10 Golan Arms battle stations protected by 50 weapon platforms. Extensive ring of weapon satellites, approximately 400. Starfighters based on Duro or its floating cities, 3,350. Total, 5,350 fighters, 500 bombers, weapon platforms and satellites, 1,500. 44th GAR Army Group is deployed to Duro to hold the planet. They're reinforced by a Karmasi armor division. RK equals. Fleet defending Mandalore. Rear Admiral Gilad Pellaeon in command. Flagship Venator Cruiser Avenger, silencer equipped. Venator Cruiser Vengeance, silencer equipped. Both are nominally the only ships currently in the Mandalorian Star Navy. Republic 8 Fleet, 8 Venator cruisers, 225 fighters, 25 bombers each, 5 acclimators, 60 fighters, 60 bombers, 11 light cruisers, 36 CR-90 frigates, 1,500 Mandalorian assault fighters, 160 small armed freighters and corvettes brought back by warriors who answered Mandalore's call to arms. 2 armies, still in training equipped with Republic, provided vehicles. 800 Basilic droids as aerospace assets. RK equals. Confederacy fleet moving towards Duro and Corellia. 1st Fondor Sector Fleet. Admiral Trench commanding. 25 Lucra Hulk battleships, 1,000 Vultures each, /300 upgraded. 700 regular, meant as meat shields or atmospheric combat /pulls 60 weapon platforms using tractor beams, 8 Lucra Hulk command ships. 1,500 Vultures each, /400 upgraded. 1,100 regular /pulls 60 weapon platforms using tractor beams. 19 Providence dreadnoughts, pulls 20 weapon platforms using tractor beams. 36 command frigates, pulls 10 weapon platforms. 368 munificent frigates. 50,000 Vultures spread among the frigates, all regular. Total, 87,000 Vultures. 10,700 upgraded space superiority and strikecraft platforms. 76,300 regular Vultures. Weapon platforms, 2,720. RK equals. Confederacy fleet approaching Mandalore. Numbers unknown, estimated to significantly outnumber and outgun the Republic naval presence in the system. 138th. Chapter 34. Parts 4 and 5. Phase 34. The Confederacy strikes back. RK equals. Part 4. RK equals. CIS Dreadnought Conquest. 1st Fondor Sector Fleet flagship. 3 light seconds from Duro. Admiral Trench waited for his whole fleet to finish its hyperspace transit and assume a pre-designated formation before he made his move. He spent the time studying the sensor feed from the Vanguard and the fighters it sent to scout for any unpleasant surprises. The Republic was acting as predicted. Trench would have preferred that the enemy dedicated more ships to protect Duro. Each one he could destroy here would be one less to face when assaulting the primary objective of the whole offensive. More problematic was the reason why there weren't any more ship defending this world. The Admiral would bet his remaining flesh and blood eyes that the Republic fleets at Corellia and Kuat were busy training. Simply gathering a sector fleet that has never properly worked as a single unit at one place and expecting them not to get in each other's way as much as in the enemy's was wishful thinking at best. That's why Trench had been drilling the principal commanders of the offensive and their subordinates for months. He even delayed the lunch date for a week until everything was performing up to his admittedly high standards. The tactical plot refreshed and Trench smiled. His fleet was in place. Finally, it was time to put his theories to the test. This is Admiral Trench to 1st Fondor Fleet. Talon 1, execute. From now on, unless he saw an opportunity or something unexpected happened, Trench was going to be a mere spectator. RK equals. The Confederacy fleet divided into 8 battle groups, led by Lucra Hulk command ships. Those units consisted by 3 battleships and 40 munificents each. The remaining part of the fleet centered around the flagship was Trench's reserve. Thanks to all the dreadnoughts being concentrated in one place, along with twice their number of escorts, that gave the Admiral an armored fist to use as he saw fit. The bulk of the fleet assumed a crescent formation and advanced towards Duro. While the planet's outer defensive ring was made by 12 Golan stations, only 4 of them faced the Confederacy force. They were backed by a third of the Republic fleet, 3 Venators, 6 Acclamators, 3 heavy cruisers, and 14 frigates. The stations themselves controlled 200 weapon platforms and were screened by minefields. Unfortunately for the defenders, the Confederacy knew for more than a month the exact parameters of Duro's fixed defenses thanks to a traitor bought by CIS intelligence agents. A single battle group moved until it was almost in the center of the Confederate formation, and it launched 2,000 standard Vultures as a screening force. They were followed by bombers, which would be quite vulnerable if engaged by anything the Republic had. However, that was accounted for, and 10 Munificent flew with them to provide umbrella coverage until the strike craft could launch their seismic charges to clean up the minefield. The only surprise during this opening engagements was received by the Republic forces. Their vanguard launched its fighters and sent them on the heels of heavy anti-fighter missile barrage. The vultures were wiped out in short order, and the Republic's small craft went after the bombers. Once the torrents were committed, the escorting frigates launched everything in their hangars, and they were stacked with droid fighters. More were sitting on their hulls, and they were sent out too. The whole purpose for the sacrifice was simple: to lure out the enemy interceptors in a killing ground, and they took the bait. From the 600 torrents launched by the Venators, 563 survived slaughtering the droid fighters. Perhaps it was arrogance, a belief that they could survive everything that then frigates could throw at them and gut the bombers before the latter could strike. Perhaps it was an underestimation of how effective the umbrella system was, because the Confederacy had been careful to test it only when it could be sure that there wouldn't be Republic survivors, and the bulk of the Navy received the upgrade only during the calm period that followed the debacle at Geonosis. In the end, it didn't matter. The torrents had to contest with almost 8 times their numbers while avoiding missiles launched from the munificence. That they were on the edge of Guardian coverage didn't help either. The only saving grace was that they faced unmodified vultures. The torrent's missiles gave them a solid edge, and they distinguished themselves before the enemy fighters swarmed them. 2 wings lived long enough to disengage, and only the tattered remains of a single squadron made it back to its mothership. Between the torrents and entering a proper Guardian coverage, the CIS lost almost 1,800 fighters, and the rest were wiped out when they dived into a suicidal charge of the minefields and the weapon platforms hidden there in order to screen the bombers. Despite all their escort could do, a third of the strike craft perished before they could unleash their payloads. Half of the remaining bombers were blown apart while they attempted to disengage. The minefields were erased by overlapping energy waves that could be resisted by nothing less than capital ships' shields or armor, and most of the weapon platforms went out with them. The 10 munificents entered hyperspace on the edge of enemy effective range and returned practically immediately less than 20 kilometers from the 2 Golan stations anchoring the Republic fleet. Instead of slowing down or trying to evade, they went in while overloading their reactors and pushing the engines beyond their limits. Every forward-mounted weapon spoke in unison. Every spark of spare power was fed into the shields. To their credit, the defenders reacted immediately, and a single salvo went in before it was too late. 2 of the munificents were crippled by the heavy firepower of Venators and battle stations, and a third blew up when its shields were overloaded and a reactor with disengaged safeties went critical. It wasn't enough. 7 practically untouched munificents slammed into the Golans, followed by the wrecks which couldn't be diverted in time. A Golan weapons platform is an impressive feat of engineering. It doesn't need a hyperdrive or big engines, beyond those for station keeping. That left a lot of space for additional weapons and armor. They could take an awe-inspiring amount of punishment before being destroyed. Usually it was much easier and simpler to go after their weapons in order to take them out of the equation. Further, there was a reason why such stations were usually deployed within gravity well. It was to make a ramming attack problematic. The battle stations outdid every expectation. Their shields held until each was struck by a second frigate. Even then, thanks to their heavy armor and robust engineering, it could be said that the Golans weren't outright killed by the next frigate that rammed their armor with enough speed to be considered giant KEWs. There was no question that the stations were dead when another munificent slammed into each of them, and the remaining frigates shredded themselves when they plowed through the debris field. That was what the rest of the CIS fleet was waiting for. They executed hyperspace jumps of their own. 2 battle groups targeted the remaining Golans in the area, with the other 5 appearing in a rough semicircle around the Republic vanguard. Thousands of fighters nesting upon the Confederate ships launched and swarmed the enemy. They were another distraction, followed by just enough shots to take out shields, engines, and some of the weapons, because the next wave of the attack consisted by boarding pods chock full with Commando and SB droids. It took Admiral Trench only half an hour to break through Duro's outer defenses, and the exchange rate was very much in his favor. =RK=. Battle for Duro. Losses after the first engagement: Republic 3 Venators, 1 captured; 6 Acclamators, 3 Dreadnought heavy cruisers, 1 captured; 14 CR-90 frigates, 600 Torrent fighters, 150 Y-wing bombers, 4 Golan battle stations, 200 weapon platforms, CIS, 34 munificent frigates, 10 more with minor to moderate damage, 1 Lucra Hulk with minor damage, 7,000 regular Vulture fighters, 860 upgraded Vultures in bomber strike craft role, equals RK equals. Part 5. CIC Republic Star Destroyer Victoria, Victory 1 class. 3rd Corps Fleet flagship. High orbit above Duro. Admiral Dow gripped the armrests of his seat as he helplessly watched a third of his fleet be swarmed and taken apart by unexpectedly coordinated enemy battle groups. His only option to help his people meant leaving Duro's inner defense perimeter and thus the coverage of the Golans and weapon satellites. Doing so would require leaving the planet's gravity well, and thus the relative security from hyperspace jumps in the face. It also meant getting into a great position to be jumped by the CIS reserve. The alternative wasn't something he liked either: stand in pace and at least continue existing as a fleet in being threatening the enemy's rear, and more importantly, logistics. The Confederate admiral would either need to leave a quite strong blocking force to keep 3rd Corps fleet bottled in, or accept the casualties that would come with assaulting Duro. Comms sent our sensor logs of the engagement thus far to High Command, as well as our forces at Corellia and Quat. Launch all fighters and bombers, defensive pattern Lambda. Dow was surprised that he somehow kept his voice even. His vanguard along the minefields were meant to prevent the enemy from carrying out successful ramming attacks on the Golans without getting a large covering force into range of both the stations and his ships. The admiral grimaced. He underestimated the enemy, expected them to attack more or less conventionally. The infernal coordination of the CIS battle groups had nasty implications too. If their commanders could maintain proper C&C during a full fleet battle, they would be able to take apart most Republic forces that tried to stop them. While the sector fleets at Corellia and Kuat were training in similar tactics by necessity of protecting the spread-out industry in those systems, Dow knew that they weren't ready yet. If the other separatist fleets were proficient to the same extent as the one he was facing, it would be imperative to slow them down. That's why he gave the order to launch fighters. Right now, he had probably the best opportunity he would get to cut his losses and run. The bulk of the enemy fleet had their hyperdrives recovering from the tactical jumps they utilized against the Republic vanguard, and the admiral was sure he could get most of his remaining forces past the enemy reserve and away in hyperspace before the rest of the enemy fleet can move in to crush him. Doing so would be the sane choice. Perhaps the only one that would see either Dow or any of his people leave Duro alive. It was the right tactical call, to get his fleet out and preserve it so it could fight another day. Unfortunately, doing so was the wrong strategic choice. It was vital that the separatists were slowed down, and he had one way to do so, or at least pin some of their forces down. He had to stand and fight. Dow's decision let him watch helplessly how his ships were torn apart in the crossfire of 4 battle groups, each of which had the firepower at least equal to that of the dying vanguard. He noted that the enemy was attempting to cripple the ships and glared at the holotank when they launched boarding pods. "Captain, have security deploy across the ship. I want all vital areas fortified. Comms, make sure the rest of the fleet follows suit." The clone in charge of Victoria confirmed he understood the orders and began implementing them. Half hour. It took that long for 3rd Corps Fleet's vanguard to be taken out. The separatists left 10 frigates to look over the wrecks which were undoubtedly still contested, then dressed their ranks and faced the rest of the Republic fleet. In contrast with the enemy's opening move, there was little finesse in what followed. A dozen munificents jumped at the edge of the minefields surrounding the inner defensive perimeter and shielding Dow's fleet. They immediately launched 3,000 vultures that simply flew at the defenses. Those fighters were followed by 1,000 strike craft. The munificents died seconds after they launched the last of their broods, and 10 modified missiles meant to carry multiple seismic charges as replacement to their concussion warheads. Vultures burned by the hundreds as they ran afoul of mines and anti-fighter missiles. Half of the bombers followed suit before they could break through the outer layer of the minefields. Weapon platforms opened fire with their laser cannons, and some launched proton torpedoes at slower targets. For a few minutes, the night sky above Duro was lit up by thousands of short-lived stars. When the dust settled, there was a wide corridor carved through the minefields, and most weapon platform in the R were wiped out. The Separatists' casualties were total, yet those were losses they could afford. Concentrate forward firepower on the breach, launch bombers and have them cover it, Dao ordered while the last vultures were sacrificing themselves. He spoke just in time, because seconds later a whole battle group made a perilously short jump through hyperspace. Its leading elements let Duro's gravity yank them back in real space, and 15 munificents suddenly decelerated in front of the defenders. 4 of them were dragged back out of hyperspace by intact interdictor mines and arrived in the middle of the intact portion of the minefields, where they were blown apart before they knew what hit them. The other unlucky frigates died soon under the concentrated fire of the defenders. Yet all those escorts did their job. They sacrificed themselves so more powerful and important ships could get into position practically unmolested. The remaining munificents and the battleships they escorted launched their small craft, all 7,000 of them, and opened fire on the Republic forces. Half the vultures went for the minefields and weapon platforms. Most of them died clearing them up the hard way. The rest of the small craft slammed headfirst into a storm of anti-fighter and capital ship fire, along with more than twice their number of torrents. The droid fighters died hard and did their jobs. They kept the Republic bombers well away from the battleships, which were so close that their umbrellas couldn't possibly intercept enough of the enemy's small craft. By the time the defenders could break through the vultures, the minefields were gutted, and 2 more battle groups jumped in the cleared space. Their fighters swarmed forward and jumped the 2 bomber wings that somehow managed to approach the enemy. Half a squadron of Y-wings actually survived long enough to execute their bombing run, and they savaged the right flank of a battleship before a few hundred vultures blew them out of space. Then the 3 Confederacy battle groups closed the range even further while unleashing every single weapon they possessed at the defenders. Intensify forward firepower, ignore enemy cripples, and concentrate on disabling as many of them as possible, Dao ordered. Have the Duros sent all their remaining fighters to back our wings. Reconfigure the Guardians to avalanche mode. Once our small craft have broken through, launch all remaining missiles at the enemy leading elements. This was the kind of battle the Republic Admiral had been counting on. He hoped that the enemy would commit to an assault, yet dreaded the prospect. By now, the CIS had lost at least 20,000 fighters to clean the minefields, but they finally managed it, and 2 more battle groups jumped into range, one above and the other below 3rd Corps Fleet. Even when counting on the heavy defense around Duro, that was more firepower than Dao's fleet could face and survive even before you took into account all the weapon platforms the enemy ship dragged into range. The Admiral smiled bleakly. He had the enemy where he wanted them. Thousands of missiles launched from weapon pods bolted on Jiva's space city, which floated just below the battlefield and at least for the moment was protected by the planetary shield. At the same time, the 2,000 torrents Dao had left, along with 1,000 Duros's fighters, threw themselves at the enemy on the heels of a thick swarm of anti-fighter missiles. The small craft added most of their remaining ordnance to the barrage, then approached to cannon range. The whole fleet and the Golans shifted their fire as appropriate, and all that concentrated firepower managed to punch a hole in the enemy fighter screen. In just a couple of minutes, thousands of vultures simply vanished under the onslaught. Even more of the droid fighters jumped to close the gap, but it was too late. The Separatists' Guardian knockoff did its best, however the range was too small and there were too many targets. The Republic and Duro pilots paid in blood to close to point-blank range, where they unleashed every single missile and torpedo they had left before going in guns blazing. They knew that there was no going back, and many chose to seek an appropriate target to ram. Others dared the odds and continued to fight to the bitter end. Back in his flagship's CIC, Dao felt sick. He knew what he was doing when he ordered this stand. Knew the consequences when he sent his pilots on that suicide mission. And he knew if he had to do it again, he would do so because it worked. The 3 closest enemy battleships were crippled by the missiles that struck them despite the truly phenomenal amount of defensive firepower they could put in space. Those Lucrehulk fell out of formation and would soon be replaced by another battle group that was slowly approaching through real space. Fire Pattern Beta 5. Dao ordered, while the missiles launched by the city were still halfway to their targets. The defenders shifted their targeting priorities yet again, and they trailed every weapon they could upon the munificence, escorting the battle group coming from below. A third of the frigates either died or were crippled before the missile's strike hit home. The enemy's umbrella took a large chunk of the huge salvo. However, there was too much incoming ordnance to stop. With the battleships so close to the planet and lacking time to change vectors, they simply couldn't escape by entering hyperspace. 1,000 heavy concussion missiles struck just 4 Lucrehulks. They were all built in the huge factories even now toiling on Duro's surface, along with all the ECM and decoy birds that allowed them to reach their targets. 2 of the battleships were relatively fortunate. The warheads slammed into their outer rings that were mostly empty hangars and storage spaces for supplies. Their cores survived practically intact, and they were able to detach from the ruined cargo sections. The pair took at least 100 missiles apiece at the spheres where their most important systems, including the main reactors, were located. While those sections were heavily armored, such firepower was more than they could take. The ships simply cracked and blew apart under the multiple missile strikes. Setting up the stage for such success didn't come cheap for the Third Corps fleet. More than half its remaining ships were either destroyed or little more than drifting wrecks, with the rest suffering from various amounts of damage. 2 of the Golans supporting them were silenced almost at the same time, and a third soon stopped firing when it was swarmed by strikecraft. Without any fighter support left, their magazines empty and their coverage compromised by battle damage, the Guardians were unable to stop the remaining vultures from swarming the Republic fleet. Then the remaining battleship groups entered the fray to replace their lost brethren, and the fate of Third Corps fleet was sealed. Victoria's bridge was silent. The alarms were deliberately shut down. Most of the crew had gotten to the escape pods, while Dao had remained behind so he could keep commanding his fleet until the bitter end. Somehow, despite all the enemy threw at them, the Republic forces held for 12 hours. Tugs had maneuvered the remaining Golans into range to provide support only to see them rammed by munificence the hard way, going sublight all the way and sacrificing frigates to make sure others hit their marks. The bitter smile that never left Admiral Dao's face ever since his vanguard was taken apart remained while his flagship was pounded to scrap by a whole battleship division. RK equals CIS Dreadnought Conquest. 1st Fondor Sector Fleet Flagship. 3 light seconds from Duro. Fleet Admiral Trench stared impassively at the wreckage that used to be a powerful Republic fleet. It was mixed with the remains of Duro's inner defense ring, along with those of too many good Confederate ships. The cost of this victory made him pause. If it wasn't all part of the overall strategy, Trench would be raging at all the ships wasted here. Almost a third of his battle line was either gone or crippled. The same went for his munificence and vultures. Only the reserve was intact, and that was because there was simply no good opportunity to deploy it. The battle space had been terribly crammed even without adding those dreadnoughts. The Republic would believe that they have won a strategic victory here, that their admiral had crippled Trench's fleet and forced it to spend the next 2 weeks consolidating and securing the nearby systems while repairs could be carried on. Such an assumption would be mostly correct. Trench lost more than he feared while reducing Duro's defenses. Yet it was a price that had to be paid. This planet had a strategic location. Even now, mere minutes after the battle was over, there were convoys en route from Fondor with replacement parts, supplies, and the tools to turn this place into a fortress. The most important planet in the system was already under assault, with whole droid armies dropping to the surface and division landing in the floating cities. Element of the fleet were flying out to capture the industry in the outer and inner system, while commando units were trying to take as much of the orbital shipyards intact as possible. It remained to be seen how much of the system's industry could be taken before the enemy could destroy it. Something that might have been a smile passed over the Admiral's face. He had a call to make to the Duros leadership with an offer of conditional surrender. After that, he had to keep the system secure in case of a Republic counterattack until the third and final stage of the offensive was ready to be launched. RK equals Republic losses during the assault on Duro, Third Corps fleet destroyed, Duro's inner defenses destroyed, Outer defenses, 4 Golans destroyed, 6 surrendered, 2 holding out. Confederate losses, 1 droid command ship destroyed, 1 crippled, 1 moderate damage, 1 light damage. 5 Lucra Hulk battleships destroyed, 3 crippled, 4 moderate damage, 6 light damage, 98 munificence destroyed, 11 crippled, 36 moderate damage, 24 light damage, 38,000 vultures destroyed, 6,544 damaged, 2,783 upgraded vultures destroyed, 544 damaged, 139th. Chapter 34, Part 6, 7 and Interlude. Interlude, How the Naboo Crisis Changed the Galaxy, =RK equals. One of the most important events that set up the stage for the Clone Wars is often either overlooked or examined for the obvious consequences, Sheev Palpatine being elected as the new Chancellor and the Trade Federation facing investigations along with heavy fines. While those events are undoubtedly important, others equally vital political and military changes are often dismissed, especially in the core worlds. That's UND Erstan D. Able. Most of the events we'll be looking at happen D on the Outer Rim, or in the colonies in the expansion region, and D, to a much lesser extent, in the Inner Rim. Most of those changes didn't really affect the core world DS, with Corellia and D Fon D, or being two notable exceptions. They were DC a lot of business coming their way in the years leading to the formal formation of the CIS and D the Clone Wars. When examining the facts logically, what happened D isn't a huge surprise to anyone. Or at least it shouldn't be. The whole galaxy saw a Republic member world be invaded by a mega-corporation that had a representative in the Senate in its own right. It watched D as the Republic government was tied up in legalities and D procedures. Instead of dispatching aid to their occupied member world, the Senate chose to begin an investigation to create a committee to examine the situation. We all know the outcome. Naboo wasn't liberated D by a Republic naval fleet. It had DA to fight on its own, and D only the AID of a pair of JDII and DI. A simply unreal amount of luck combined this with a flaw in Tra, DA Fey D Eration, D Octrine allow D them victory. The Senate act D only after the situation was resolved D. Many believe D that the consequences for the Tra D A Fey D Eration were little more than a slap on the wrist, given the gravity of their actions. Yet that was enough to eventually derive them to become one of the founding members of the Confederacy. All of the above is public null DGE that can be easily found D in the holonet. The consequences of those events are hard to trace, so a person can build a complete picture for themselves. The galaxy saw the invasion of Naboo, saw that peaceful world be abandoned one day by the Republic. It saw that only military action execute D by the Naboo people led D to their liberation. Thousands of systems concluded that the only way to guarantee their security was to either build up sufficiently powerful armed forces from scratch or to significantly upgrade and expand their existing ones. Soon the demand for military hardware outpaced the supply. Production all over the mid and outer rim expanded, and even Corellia and Fondor were contracted to build more ships. In 10 years, that military build-up would see the worlds disillusioned with the Republic joining the expanding Confederacy, one after another, along with their military forces. Fondi, or which Hey D, become a huge arsenal supplying the colonies with all they need. ED would as soon choose to become a part of the CIS and D, thus provi DE a large increase in D industrial potential for the young alliance. The political implications of the invasion of Naboo for the galaxy are in fact more important than the military ones. They in fact create DD an environment where the latter became all but inevitable. Arguably, it was the Republic's impotency D during the Naboo crisis that made DE the creation of the CIS possible. It enabled D, the Confederacy's unexpected D growth. 1,000 DS of systems joined D the CIS after losing faith in the Republic's ability, and D, more importantly, willingness to protect them, which has always been one of the large benefits of becoming a member world D. That was especially true for the world DS1, the Outer Rim, where the economic benefits of being a part of the Republic were quite small in comparison to the benefits reaped D by the core and D inner rim systems. The same environment, if to a lesser extent exist D, in the expansion region. Extract from History of the Clone Wars, Volume 1, The Calm Before the Storm. Published by Anaxes Military Academy. RK equals. Phase 34, The Confederacy Strikes Back. Part 6, RK equals. Mandalorian Military HQ, location classified. The place was so new that it still smelled of fresh paint, plastic and metal from recently installed equipment. There had been no time to put any decorations besides a flag with the symbol of Mandalore, which covered one of the walls in the briefing room. The people who, for all intents and purposes, were the government, were gathered inside discussing the impending Confederate attack and their readiness to receive it. We have confirmation that a powerful separatist force left Findar 36 hours ago. They should be here before noon tomorrow. Captain Trek informed the men in charge of Mandalore. We're as ready as we can be, General Skirata said. The shield generators and power distribution network are a fortresses defended by 2 Republic armored divisions, a clone infantry division and 1st Army Group. 2nd is spread among the major cities and industrial centers, and backed up by every warrior on the planet not part of the army. The man running things in Mandalorian space, while Mandalore was away, reported, "We've got enough shelter for the civilian population to keep most of our people safe at every major population center. My people are confident that we've rooted out the majority of Death Watch true believers who are left. However, we're equally sure that the Confederacy still has at least a few agents planetside they can contact for intelligence or simply buy. We're working on finding them all and plugging up any leaks we can find. The protectors are back to 70% of authorized strength. With volunteers going primary to the Army and Navy, I'm not confident we'll be able to do our job properly everywhere. I might need to request aid from MP units in certain depending on how things shape in the future," Ordo reported. "That covers the ground-side affairs." "Admiral Pelion?" Skirata asked. "My fleet is ready, and the devices provided by General Vale are operational. I've chosen to assume a defensive posture, and depending on the enemy fleet composition and the effect the devices have on them, I'll either counterattack or fall under the planetary shield. While some people might disagree, we're aware of the strategic situation. It will be 6 to 8 months before our light naval units are complete, and between 12 to 16 for the capital ships, if you can keep the shipyards intact," Yomaget said, "with no Republic reinforcements expected for at least 2 to 4 months. We would be glad if you can keep your fleet intact and the orbitals reasonably secure until that changes, Admiral Pelion." "That's what I intend." Gilad nodded. "If that's all, I need to get back to the fleet." "Victory and glory, Admiral," Skirata said as goodbye. "Same to you boys and girls, General." Pelion saluted and headed to the hangars with Captain Trek on his heels. When they left, the Mandalorians continued their discussions. "We'll need to properly present the situation to our more volatile members," Bralor began. "Some of our warriors, especially those who came back, won't like a defensive posture or the fact that we're dependent on the Republic for a navy." "I don't like it either, even if they've been on the level so far," Ordo added. "While I agree we can't make ships appear from thin air, we'll need the Republic for at least the next 2 years." Yomaget shrugged. "How is incorporating the sector going?" Awad asked. "We can use the additional manpower and industry. The Duchess has been in talks with their senators and ambassadors on Coruscant, and we've sent delegations to the most important planets. Those with large Mandalorian population are pleased by our offer, however others don't want to hear anything about falling under our influence." "What about our detractors at Coruscant?" "From what I hear, the Cathar are baying for our blood," Brylor inquired. "They're a problem. Unfortunately, Silveris actually has the full backing of her government. The last thing they want to see is us getting stronger," Horus answered. Dealing with diplomacy was a 4th hat he had to wear while that service was being restored after the attack and cleaned up from pacifists who might be against the resurgence of Mandalorian militarism. That might get unpleasant. Silveris and her cronies already managed to slow down certain equipment and technological transfers for the army, Orwad grumbled. "The same is true for industrial equipment to speed up our shipbuilding," Yomaget added. I'm pretty sure Mandalore has plans for dealing with that nuisance. Unfortunately, for the time being, he's cut off from the centers of Republic power." "At least he took care of Crimson," Skirata said. He had seen the uncensored reports from Atria, the GAR's preliminary conclusions of how dangerous that thing was, and his own theories aligned with them. There were a lot of quiet murmurs of agreement. The one thing that either pissed of some people or got Vale more support from others was the fact that he didn't take a single proper Mandalorian warrior with him to deal with Crimson, which also meant that none were lost when the units sent to take out the planetary shields were sacrificed in the orbital bombardment. RK equals CIC Mandalorian Cruiser Avenger. High orbit above Mandalore. When the Confederacy fleet arrived, Pelion and his people were waiting for them. Trek's reports were right. The enemy did bring a stronger force to eliminate Mandalore. While the enemy fleet that exited hyperspace flight light seconds from the planet was smaller than the one Grievous brought, this one had significantly more firepower thanks to the 12 Criffing battleships it brought. Gilad frowned. In a stand-up fight, he might be able to take out all the Munificents and about a third of the Luckerhulks, but that would see his fleet gutted. He simply would be unable to reduce the incoming enemy firepower fast enough to win. The Admiral smiled coldly. It was too bad he wasn't planning on a proper conventional battle. 8 Fleet, we're going with Blue 2. Calculate hyperspace insertion coordinates and jump at my mark, Pelion ordered. Captain, I hope for all our sakes that the silencer works as advertised. Gilad whispered quiet enough that only Trek heard him. Me too, sir. The plan is solid and it should come as a complete surprise. After all, attacking the Separatists with the forces we have is going to play in their favor. The captain smirked. Or so they'll believe. Pelion nodded. He closed his eyes and ran some mental calculation. If he criffed up his fleet, might get either mauled or leave the enemy between them and the planet and thus let them land troop, which when he thought about it wasn't as big a problem as it would be at most other worlds. The Admiral banked on the silencer's reveal and sheer shock impact to buy time and reduce the enemy numbers. Calculations complete. The fleet is ready to jump. Fire Plan Beta 3. Ignore the battleships and concentrate on the enemy frigates. Pelion paused so his orders could be transmitted. Execute. Now it was time to put the silencer to the test. Part 7 equals RK equals Bridge, CIS Droid Command Ship, Murderous Intent, 5 light seconds from Mandalore. While 5th Fleet finished its real space transition and assumed a proper offensive formation, its commander ordered fighter wings to begin sweeping the system for any additional enemy forces. TF-1726 was the droid in charge. He was the first of Confederate super tactical droids to receive a significant upgrade, which meant a more robust body, much fewer constraints upon his programming, and significantly expanded processing capabilities. All that explained why he preferred to be called by his chosen name, Commander Kraken, instead of the dull factory place designation he wore. The super tactical droid had distinguishing himself by defeating the Republic forces at Quell shortly before the second battle for Geonosis. That victory earned Kraken the privilege of getting the upgrades first, as well as a place in command of the fleet, sent to remove the Mandalorian problem once and for all. TF-1726 took a long look at the sensor readings after his ship exited hyperspace and began crunching numbers. The result of any engagement should have been obvious. The CIS battleships made all the difference, and if commanded competently, there was no way that he could lose. Math didn't lie after all. As a consequence, Kraken was taken aback when the whole Republic fleet advanced until they were out of Mandalore's gravity well before entering hyperspace. He had mere moments to ponder the strange enemy behavior before the whole 8th Fleet came back on his right flank. Kraken tilted its head to the side in exasperation. If the Republic commander wanted a battle in open space, he was ready to oblige them. TF-3, engage the enemy. All TFs launch fighters. TF-1, move to flank. TF-2, move to encircle using a hyperspace jump. TF-1726 ordered. The enemy had a short-lived advantage in numbers and firepower at the point of contact that resulted in 6 Munificents dying in a short order, in exchange of a heavily damaged light cruiser and a pair of CR-90s. The force Kraken personally commanded, TF-1, moved past TF-3 to flank the enemy, and already thousands of vultures were flying towards the Republic fleet. The tactical plot flashed red, and the super battle droid simply stared in incomprehension. 27 munificents simply vanished from the sensors. The system initially logged it as a glitch and began self-diagnostic. "Report," Kraken snapped. "The Republic deployed a new weapon. Multiple beams of red light came from 2 of their ships, and we lost more than half of our frigates." The tactical droid in charge of TF-3 was beginning to panic. "Target those ships, fire everything," Kraken ordered. "Redline the engines, we need to enter range faster." For 2 minutes, 5th Fleet's 3rd Task Force threw itself against the Republic 8 fleet. They lost most of their remaining frigates in the process, and the enemy was practically engulfed by a firestorm made of dying fighters. TF-1 was about to enter range when the Republic ships charged against the battle group they have been engaging since the beginning. Kraken had opened a feed to his ship's optical sensors, and he managed to see exactly what happened. TF-3's remaining frigates vanished in massive explosions when crimson bolts came from the center of the enemy formation. Then one of the battleships was given the same treatment. The Luckerhulks was protected by massive shields backed up by a lot of armor. Those defenses actually made a difference, and the behemoth survived. However, it was far from intact. Its shields were drained and pierced in multiple places, which resulted in wrecked sensor clusters and weapon emplacements. The whole 5th Fleet flew past it while unleashing every gun that could bear upon the battleship. They didn't stop either, but continued to open the range and began vanishing in hyperspace the moment their hyperdrives recovered. Unfortunately, none of Kraken's ships could get into proper vectors to plot an intercept. The losses were appalling. 50 munificents destroyed, 1 battleship battered into a wreck, and another with moderate damage, along with more than 10,000 fighters lost, a significant part before or while launching. The 5th Fleet managed to take out a single Venator, 6 light cruisers, and 20 enemy frigates, along with unknown number of Republic fighters. There were reports of damage inflicted upon the enemy capital ships. However, Kraken wouldn't know for sure until all the sensor logs could be examined. The super-tactical droids forced its processors into overclock. At worst, it had a few minutes to get its force into position to counter another Republic attack. At best, that was it, and the enemy was retreating. However, such an outcome wasn't something Kraken could count on. The problem was those 2 unknown weapons. They were too dangerous and had to be eliminated, else the enemy would be able to pull another 2 or 3 such attacks before they lost too many ships. While 5th Fleet could survive such losses, it wasn't something that Kraken found acceptable after his upgrades and updates. He needed the enemy to come to him and stand to fight. Solving that equation was simple. All ships form up on TF-1 and execute a hyperspace insertion on the edge of Mandalore's gravity well. All ground units prepare for deployment. 140th Chapter 34, Part 8 and Interlude. Phase 34, The Confederacy Strikes Back. Equals RK equals. Part 8. Equals RK equals. CIC Mandalorian Cruiser Avenger. 20 light seconds from Mandalore. "I need to know the status of the fleet," Pelion ordered. "We're working on it, sir. We've lost 1 Venator, offensive at dawn, 6 light cruisers and—" The staff lieutenant paused. "We've got only 16 frigates on sensors, 20 CR-90 are presumed lost, damage reports are still coming in." "Those battleships made a number on us," Trek grumbled. "At point-blank range." The captain shook his head. "I want emergency repairs complete ASAP," the admiral ordered. "Give me a status update on the damage the fleet took when you have it, Staff Lieutenant." "Comms, I want an update from Mandalore on what the Clanker are doing." "Sensors, the same from both the fleet and the sensor platforms in the inner system." "Captain, I need to know the status of the silencers." "Findlong, can they continue firing at the current rate before something breaks?" "I'll talk with the engineers." Trek confirmed and went for his comm unit. Pelion turned away and called the sensor logs on the main holotank. He needed to re-examine the engagement so he could judge both how effective the silencer was without being distracted by the rest of the battle. A minute later, Gilad was interrupted by a status update. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is firming up their formation and continuing towards Mandalore. Keep me apprised of any changes." I want a continuous update of hyperspace insertion coordinates at the back of their formation. Turn the fleet on the appropriate vectors once the damage assessment is complete. Pellaeon ordered and continued studying the engagement. Gilad's initial impression appeared to be correct. The silencer was simply devastating against lightly protected targets like the Munificence. As his test suggested, it was useful to break even battleship defenses. That stunt was the only thing that allowed 8 Fleet to cripple one of the Luckerhulks in such a short engagement. Pellaeon slammed a fist in the armrest of his seat, which conveniently lacked any electronics and was well padded for just such occasions. If he had just 2 more, perhaps 3 silencers, Gilad was confident that he could have won. He was reasonably sure that he could still cripple the enemy fleet if he got lucky and one of the superweapons wasn't taken out by the enemy anytime soon. Once he knew the status of his fleet, he would be able to refine his plans and assumptions. Perhaps if he could keep striking the edges of the enemy formation and getting away before they could properly concentrate their firepower. The Admiral reset the recording and began examining it again. Splitting his force in 2 groups, each centered around a silencer, might work. However, with the way his fleet arrived, in bits and pieces, Gilad knew that he would be unable to keep proper tactical command of both units. The fleet simply didn't have enough time to train as a single unit, so any particular clever maneuvers were simply out of the question. However, there were all those light ships brought by the Mandalorians waiting on the other side of the planet. He could use them. It was going to be very ugly, but it might just work. "Sir, I've got the status update. 1 moderately damaged Venator, Midnight Blade. 2 lightly damaged, Praetorian and Coruscant Dawn. 2 moderately damaged Acclamators, Lighting and Majestic. 3 light cruisers in the same state and 1 reporting light damage. The CR-90s fared worse, 5 moderately damaged and 3 lightly damaged. The captains need at least 2 hours to repair important systems easy to fix with shipboard resources," the flag lieutenant reported. "Tell them to carry on. We'll be engaging the enemy in 2 hours. Get the on-duty shift. Take 1.5 hours of downtime. The same goes for the captains." Pellaeon ordered after digesting the report. It was painful to hear, though not unexpected. There were consequences of engaging multiple battleships and their escorts at point-blank range. "Fighter loses?" the Admiral asked. "Still compiling them. Torrents were landing at the closest ships when we jumped. Preliminary estimates are 1/3 of our fighter strength. Can be a bit better or worse. Give me the numbers when you have them." "Comms, I need a secure line with Skirata. Use a direct beam through the sensor platforms away from the enemy fleet. =RK equals. Staging area 7-1, Sundari City, Mandalore. All units in the AO, he enemy fleet has broken through. Expect separatist assault within the next 20 minutes. Control's voice came over the comms of the forces dug in and around the capital. Among them was a certain commando unit attached to the only force adept on the planet. "You heard command. Lazy time's over. Check your gear and get to the transports. We'll be reinforcing any position that cannot hold," Nina ordered. "You know, I almost pity the clankers." Dev chuckled before began checking his grenade launcher. "What gave you that idea?" Arya snorted. The Sith in training looked over the skyscraper roof where they were stationed. The place used to be a civilian landing pad converted for military use. It was quite large, too. It had more than enough space for 10 LA-ATs and a unit of Basilisk war droids, and it was all properly utilized. All of them were a part of the QRF to be dispatched once the primary enemy landing sites and likely targets could be established. "I want one of those." Arya whined while watching the 5 war droids stand up after their pilots got on board. "Isn't your master making them?" Fi asked. "Can you just ask for one?" "I did," Arya grumbled. "The first production runs are promised to the Mandalorians. Perhaps I should ask my master to adopt me in his clan so I can get my hands on one faster." The Chiss woman frowned. "I want one too. We can all pass for proper Mandalorians, right?" Atin asked. "Well, General Skirata and his people certainly did their best." Fi stopped checking his sniper after voicing that thought. "I wonder if they have long-range fire support variants." "Focus, people. You can drool over the basilisks after we've dealt with the clankers." Nina shook his head in exasperation. They were commandos, special operations. While those war droids were nice, they weren't exactly fitting with Omega's job description. However, that didn't mean he didn't want to get one for himself. All units in the Sundari AO be advised. The Separatist fleet executed a hyperspace insertion in high orbit. They've began launching landing craft and fighters. So it begins, Nina noted. Get on board, we'll be deploying soon. He pointed at the waiting transport. Equals RK equals. Sundari airspace, Mandalore. A year of war can be a long time when the leadership of an army is willing to learn. Since the beginning of the conflict, the Confederacy had attacked thousands of worlds and successfully taken a lot of them. They had lost planets too. However, until they experienced a change of leadership, there was no institutional drive to learn from their mistakes. That was left to individual commanders, those who survived after criffing up anyway. Yet the leadership was replaced. Both victories and defeats were examined. The enemy tactics too. Conclusions were made, and finally the Confederate military as a whole began putting in practice the lessons it should have learned months earlier. Duro and Mandalore were among the first places where the Confederate army was able to demonstrate how they've changed. Of those two assaults, the latter was undoubtedly the harder. First, the system wasn't secure. The majority of Admiral Pellion's fleet was still operational and presented moderate to high threat for the CIS Navy in orbit. Second, Mandalore was one of the places in the galaxy which anyone reasonable would have thought twice before invading. The Confederate military did precisely that, and they reached the conclusion that the changes in tactics and doctrine implemented across both the Army and Navy would be sufficient to at least secure a foothold on Mandalore with the forces given to TF-1726. It was at noon Sundari time when that belief was put to the test. The siege of Mandalore began with 10,000 fighters diving through the planetary shield, followed by 1,500 strike craft, thousands of assault ships and hundreds of transport. A not insignificant percentage of those craft were disabled by the energy field protecting the planet. Nearly a fifth of the vultures and 127 of the strike craft malfunctioned and crashed. Almost 20% of the transports had to make emergency landing where they could, with a lot of them hitting the ground at velocities even their droid crews couldn't survive. Yet the bulk of the invasion force made it through the first line of defense largely intact. Their first act on entering the atmosphere came from the large transports. They were outfitted with both jammers and missile pods. Suddenly, the incoming contacts doubled thanks to Confederacy EW efforts. Thousands of missiles were launched to seek any active sensor platforms they could find. Some were attack birds, however the majority were sophisticated decoys. AA emplacements, proton and laser cannons arose from their hiding places and opened fire at the invaders. Thousands of Mandalorian fighters rose from the surface to meet the incoming vulture swarm, and the skies were set afire. The defenders did their best. Things might have been different if Kraken hadn't chosen to attack the region bombarded by General Grievous months ago. If the Republic had provided more material or financial support, the defense network around the capital might have been better equipped to face the onslaught coming their way. The defenders extracted heavy price from the machines coming to invade their world anyway. However, it was a price that Kraken's army could afford to pay. By the time the last transport hit the ground, either landing on its own or shot down, 2/3 of the vultures were destroyed, yet the skies were clear from Mandalorian fighters. Only the surviving AA emplacements made sure that Confederate strike craft and assault ships didn't achieve a total aerial superiority. The majority of surviving vultures pulled up to provide cap and intercept any fighter or bomber flights attempting to enter the region. The assault ships dived at the entrenched defenders on the heels of all remaining strike craft. Blaster fire and missiles crossed in the air seeking their targets. Whole squads were torn apart in their trenches. Unshielded bunkers were blown open by heavy fire, while destroyed ships rained from the sky. Assault transport dropped commando units behind the Mandalorian lines. Some of them even survived to pull back to the closest Confederate staging grounds where engineers were busy setting up shield generators and AA of their own. 1 hour after the landings began, CIS tank columns backed by mechanized infantry and artillery struck the Mandalorian forward defenses around Sundari, while commando units were still doing their best to disrupt enemy attempts to reinforce. At the same time, Rearmed assault ships headed for the still existing breaches in the dome, protecting the capital loaded with fresh droids. The siege of Mandalore had begun. RK equals CIC Mandalorian Cruiser Avenger, high orbit above Mandalore. Coordinating the second strike upon the Separatist fleet was anything but easy. The timing had to be perfect, the hyperspace jump executed by 8th Fleet flawless, and they had to minimize the time in contact with the enemy. Doing it all in just a couple of hours was a testament to the skills of General Skirata and Pelion's own staffs. Without them, Gilad was sure that his brainstorm would have been impossible. In theory, the plan was simple. The Mandalorian lightships would divide in 2 equal groups, then use the planet's gravity well to swing around and strike the Separatist flanks, skimming just above the planetary shield. Just as they were getting into range, after the enemy would have time to detect them and react, 8th Fleet would execute a hyperspace jump and engage the Separatist center from below. Shoot up as many of the Confederate ships they could, then get out of range as fast as possible. After that, the survivors would regroup, check their status, and plan how to make the enemy's life miserable. It was simple in theory. Pulling it off in practice, especially when you consider that most of the Mandalorians crewing the lightships weren't Navy or even experienced shipmasters, much less trained to properly work together, was anything but. In reality, getting all those ships moving in the same direction at the same time was a feat by itself, and all of Skirata's people, who made it possible by coordinating things from the ground, deserved free drinks for as long as they wanted. When Pelion's fleet returned to real space and began targeting the enemy, the Admiral stared intently at the holotank and waited for an update. It took precious seconds for the sensors to process the raw data and feed it into the tactical display. The Admiral frowned at what he saw. In the short time it took to give the order to jump, and for the 8th Fleet to comply, the more or less ordered Mandalorian advance had fallen apart. Instead of hitting the Confederacy as 2 large groups, the lightships had spread out. It was unclear if it was just shipmasters seeking glory, their inexperience, or simply some ships being unable to maintain the same speed and direction under the conditions they were flying in due to technical difficulties. It was probably a combination of those factors. It didn't really matter. The leading ships were simply blown to pieces by the munificence on the flanks, which began peeling off to meet the OV fighters flew to intercept them too, and each one of those was one less to go after 8th Fleet. The rest of the plan simply didn't work. The Confederate commander refused to be baited and instead kept the formation intact, with the exception of the frigates at the edge of its flanks. Even worse, the enemy had put a swarm of weapon platforms in front of its ships, and they were covered by the fleet's ECM and fighter patrols until 8th Fleet found them the hard way when they unleashed their proton torpedoes. Pelion's leading elements staggered under dozens of hits. He lost most of his remaining frigates and 3 light cruisers before anyone knew what hit them. Locating and targeting the new threat took precious seconds in which the platforms continued to pour fire in his fleet. Even worse, the shift in priorities meant that more of the vultures coming to swarm the fleet were going to get through. However, none of that changed a thing as far as the heavy firepower of 8th Fleet was concerned. After all, fighters and weapon platforms were too small to be effectively targeted by either the turbo laser cannons or the silencer, and those unleashed their fury upon the enemy as planned. 25 munificence vanished when the superweapons spoke, even more shattered under the concentrated fire of 8th Fleet's capital ships. For long seconds, the Confederate fleet refused to respond. Then its guns spoke as one, and they had just 2 targets, Avenger and Vengeance. It was fortunate that Pelion had planned for such an outcome. The moment after the silencers fired, the hangar doors above the weapons began to close, and multiple ships maneuvered to interpose themselves between the cruisers carrying them and the enemy. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians reached attack range. A third of their number died getting this far, yet they were finally able to respond. Makeshift weapons bolted to the ragtag fleet spoke in a ragged barrage, and scores of concussion missiles and proton torpedoes flew at the Separatist fleet. They were followed by laser, railgun, and the odd turbo laser battery, shooting for all they were worth. As if that wasn't enough, warriors seeking either glory, redemption, or both aimed their ships at the closest Confederate target, redlined the engines, and overrode the safeties of their reactors. Only 21 of the Mandalorian ships lived long enough to escape the gravity well and enter hyperspace. However, their sacrifice wasn't in vain. 10 frigates died under their fire, or thanks to ramming attacks. 4 more were damaged along with 2 battleships which were struck by kamikazes, despite all the Umbrella could do to protect them. Things in the center were mixed bag. Before escaping in hyperspace, 8 Fleet managed to destroy 46 frigates, damaged 2 more. More importantly, they gutted another Lucrehulk. That victory came at a steep price. All escorts but a nearly crippled light cruiser and another moderately damaged were simply annihilated. Another Venator was lost, along with an Acclamator. Most damning was Vengeance's fate. After she utilized her silencer for the second time, and before it could be protecting by the closing hangar doors, a pair of Separatist strike craft slipped through everything 8 Fleet could throw their way. They unleashed their load out of proton torpedoes and followed them through in a suicide attack. Vengeance was crippled by energy feedback sent by the silencer's destruction. While most of the shunts meant to prevent such an event acted as advertised, a handful failed, and the resulting chain reaction scrammed the cruiser's hypermatter reactor, feeding the superweapon with energy. Vengeance fell out of formation, and Pelion was forced to abandon her or risk the annihilation of his remaining fleet. RK equals Siege of Mandalore, naval losses so far. First Republic 8 Fleet and Mandalorian volunteer forces. 3 Venators lost, Vengeance, offensive at Dawn and Midnight Blade, Coruscant Dawn, heavy damage, Avenger, light damage. 1 Acclamator lost, lighting, Majestic, heavy damage, Echo, moderate damage. 9 light cruisers destroyed, 1 heavy, near crippling damage, 1 moderate damage. 36 CR-90 frigates, 138 Mandalorian volunteer ships, light freighters and corvettes. 2nd 5th Confederacy Fleet, 2 Lucrehulks wrecked, 1 moderate damage, 2 light damage. 106 munificents destroyed, 6 moderate to high damage. 33,000 fighters lost, naval and surface action. 2,596 strike craft lost, naval and surface action. 367 weapon platforms lost, RK equals. Interlude, the liberation of Ryloth, RK equals. It's still argued when the first stage of the Clone Wars ended. Some believe it was after the Confederacy Council executed a successful coup and radically changed the nature of the enemy facing the Republic. However, some believe that event to be the beginning of the conflict's 3rd stage, a sentiment shared by the authors of this book. It is generally accepted by the Anaxes Military Academy that the first phase of the Clone Wars ended after the raid on Coruscant. That event led to General Delcatar Vale becoming the commander of all combat forces in the Republic. Among his first acts was the tall order of restructuring GAR High Command after it was practically destroyed after an attack on their HQ. That period is notable for the overhaul of the military command structure that saw 2/3 of the Jedi who were in practice running the war effort be either demoted or removed from command positions. Many exchanged the command of whole armies with that of battalions, companies, or even platoons. Others were attached to commando strike teams and not always put in charge. This change was one of the most visible and effective ones implemented by the general and his supporters. The first major operation carried by the Republic military under Vale's command was the liberation of Ryloth. Even today, the strategic feasibility liberating the Twi'lek homeworld is questioned, though even its biggest detractors agree that the Republic was bound to act by the political realities of the time, not to mention the moral imperative to do something about the enslavement of a whole Republic world. It wasn't before the battle was concluded and intelligence gathered on the ground examined that it became clear that Ryloth had been conceived as a trap by certain elements of the Confederate military. Whole droid armies, along with significant numbers of heavy proton artillery capable of damaging Acclamator assault ships in the atmosphere, had been deployed by the Separatists. The Confederacy Navy was present in strength too, along with a large contingent of ships under Hutt flag sent to collect the first batch of slaves promised to them by Wat Tambor, the leader of the Techno-Union. It wasn't until years later before the particulars of the deal he cut with the Hutt became clear. The space battle above Ryloth was notable for 2 things. First was the successful implementation of novel and unorthodox tactics by General Vale, many of which became standard later in the conflict. The other change had equally strong impact: the introduction of the first iteration of the Guardian system, which in less than a year would make the deployment of standard starfighters and bombers a losing proposition. However, that stage wouldn't be reached until after the third phase of the Clone Wars was concluded, with the end of Operation Deep Strike aimed at the Ground D component of the liberation was notable for a number of reasons. The most notable among them is a major change in the ROEs employed by Republic forces when assaulting a planet, though it wouldn't be until Moths later, during Second Geonosis, that the full effects would become obvious. After the infantry assault on CIS artillery positions protected from orbital bombardments by Ryloth citizens captured by the Confederacy achieved moderate success, General Vale called ion strike from the fleet in orbit. The bombardment was nominally successful. It resulted in the destruction of the CIS proton artillery, preventing the GAR landing in numbers. However, it was carried out while the Army units who failed to achieve their objectives were still in the affected area, along with all the hostages at those separatist positions. After effects from the massive energy released by the bombardment caused the death or severe injury of multiple civilians and GAR personnel, including Jed and General Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was only during Second Geonosis that it became clear to everyone that the GAR no longer was restrained by fear of causing heavy collateral damage and civilian casualties when taking out military installations or such with dual use through orbital bombardment. While controversial, such tactics met universal approval among the clone army and more limited one among regular personnel. It is notable that any attempt of changing back the GAR rose to what they were before the raid on Coruscant by elements within the Republic Senate were blocked by the military and political consequences of the liberation of Ryloth cannot be overstated. That victory represented one of the biggest setbacks for the Confederacy during the second stage of the Clone Wars, and it's understandable why some historians note it as the beginning of that period of the conflict. One of the biggest effects of the GAR victory is often overlooked. Prior to Ryloth, the Confederate droid armies were universally outfitted with switch-off codes possessed by the highest-ranking separatists' leaders. Thus, the capture of Wat Tambor and his agreement to hand over his personal codes were vital for the liberation of Ryloth. Instead of fighting through massive droid armies, the GAR won by simply switching them out. It's still unclear when the switch-off codes were universally removed from the Confederate armies. What we know for certain is that shortly after the Confederate Council seized power, the CIS no longer produced droids which could be turned off with a mere signal. Undoubtedly, that was one of the major events making possible the Another major consequence of the Confederate defeat at Ryloth was that their military leadership at the time, Count Dooku and General Grievous, conceived a trap aimed at taking out General Vale and fully regaining the initiative. The details surrounding their decisions were lost during the Confederate Council coup. However, we can infer their general intentions by examining the tactics employed by Admiral Duaningo and General Grievous in space and Count Poggle the Lesser on the surface. The political consequences were equally, if not more, important. Until Ryloth, the Republic has been on the defense and under siege all across the galaxy. There were questions in the Senate if the war could be won. Many systems were neutral to the point refusing to trade war-related materials to the Republic. Further, even after the raid on Coruscant and the bioweapon attack on Naboo, there were voices supporting the Confederacy, out of fear if not because they agreed with the separatist cause. After all, as far as anyone could see, the CIS was winning the war. Ryloth changed that perception, and later Geonosis shattered it, until Operations Deep Strike and Southern Star were launched as the two primary components of the biggest Confederate offensive since the war began. The most notable and direct consequence of the liberation and getting proof of the attempt to enslave the whole planet, combined with the outrage after Naboo, led to Corellia leaving their neutrality behind. While the Corellians didn't formally become a part of the GAR, they allied themselves with the Republic for the duration of the conflict and put their considerable industrial and economic power on the armed forces' disposal. In the short term, the addition of Corellian naval units to the war effort was actually more important. Corellian ships would play key roles during Second Geonosis. the assault on Mandalore, as well as Operation Southern Star and Deep Strike. Extract from History of the Clone Wars, Volume 2, The Road to Total War, published by Anaxes Military Academy.